you for participating in the webinar this afternoon, morning, I guess, still in Hawaii. This webinar is entitled Indigenous Partnerships for Rangeland Stewardship. And I do want to open by acknowledging that all the original tribes and villages whose sovereign lands we are on across Hawaii and California. We recognize that range managers continue to benefit from the use and occupation of this land. These lands continue to be of great importance to the descendants of the original tribes and villages. As range managers, it is vitally important that we do not only recognize the history of the land on which we stand, but also we recognize that the original people are flourishing members of the states of California and Hawaii. This is a webinar hosted by UCANR, which means that only the 10 panelists that are invited and will be speaking here today are visible, and all of the attendees are simply listening in. I imagine at this point, many of you are familiar with the webinar format. Just because you can't see one another doesn't mean that you can't participate and interact. And so there is two options for that. The first is the chat option, and the second is the Q&A. And what we're hoping is that for technical issues or clarifications that you use the chat box, and you can send to individuals or to the group. But for folks who are wanting to really engage with the panelists, we're hoping that you'll put your questions and comments in the Q&A box, which is separate from the chat, and that both will be monitored by myself and Lynn Hunsinger and Jill Fickey-Beaton, who are co-hosts with me. And I hope that that will go relatively smoothly. Again, I imagine many of you are familiar with the Zoom format by now. The webinar this afternoon will last 3 hours. Before going any further, I do want to announce that after our 3-hour webinar, there is also going to be a social, a California Pacific Section social, absolutely not required, but for any folks who want to see one another and catch up in the way that we might have if this meeting were in person, you can do that by joining us on the social. So that's going to be 4 o'clock onwards in California, 2 o'clock in Hawaii. And that's going to be a separate link that Allison Rofe is going to include in the chat, which she has already, but she'll reattach it at the very end of our meeting. But our webinar itself is going to be 3 hours, and there's going to be 3 parts. The first part is we will hear from 3 speakers, 2 that will be providing kind of Native Indigenous histories, first of California and then Hawaii, and then a 3rd speaker who's going to be talking about cultural resources and access to cultural resources. The second part of our webinar is going to showcase 3 case studies, 2 from California and 1 from Hawaii. And the 3rd part of our presentation will be a panel. So folks, all the speakers who will have presented will come back, and you'll have an opportunity as an attendee in the audience to be able to engage with the folks who have spoken, to ask questions, and hopefully stimulate good conversation. I'm really looking forward to the program that we've put together. And on that note, I really want to thank the individuals who both have agreed to speak, but then also who have spent the last couple of weeks and months planning alongside me, in particular, Lynn Hunsinger from UC Berkeley, Alexi Sagona, also from UC Berkeley, and Jill Fickey-Beaton, who's heroically been corresponding from thousands of miles away from Hawaii. Thank you to the 3 of you for your vision and your logistical support. Lastly, I'll say, and I think this is true, always true for CalPAC events, but I just want to encourage this conversation to be sort of as polite and collegial as possible, and to keep comments and the general atmosphere that way. I think that what we're discussing has some real importance and deep meaning, and I'm again really looking forward to both the presentations and hopefully the conversation that ensues afterwards. So with that, I'm going to transition into our first speaker. And Val, as you, I'll be inviting you to turn your screen on. I understand that you don't have any visual presentation, but I do want to introduce you and let the folks know who you are. So Valentin Lopez is the chairman of the Amamudsen tribal band, one of 3 historic tribes that are recognized as Ohlone. The Amamudsen are comprised of the indigenous descendants forcibly taken to Mission San Juan Bautista and Santa Cruz. Chairman Lopez is also the president of the Amamudsen Land Trust, which was established in 2012. He is a Native American advisor to the University of California, Office of the President, on issues related to repatriation. He is also a Native American advisor to the National Alliance on Mental Illness and the Phoebe Hearst Museum of Anthropology. The Amamudsen are currently working to restore their traditional indigenous knowledge regarding land stewardship so they can return to the path of their ancestors. Consequently, the Amamudsen are very active in conservation and protection efforts within their traditional tribal territory. Chairman Lopez is working to restore the Mudsen language and is a traditional Mudsen singer and dancer. And Val, thank you so much for being here and for being willing to share the history of Indigenous peoples in California. And with that, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Thank you. Once again, I'm the chairman of the Amamudsen Tribal Band, and our territory is in Central California, in the greater Monterey Bay area and inland a bit. The true history of tribes has never been told. You know, the history reports us as being hunters and gatherers, and just simple people, unsophisticated people who just randomly looked for food. And when they found something, they were very lucky and fortunate for that day. And nothing could be further from the truth. Our creation story tells us that Creator very specifically told us that it is our responsibility to take care of Mother Earth and all living things. And with that directive, our people went about learning how to take care of Mother Earth. We learned how to take care of the plants. We learned how to take care of the oceans, the wildlife, the four-legged, the winged, the finned. We learned how to take care of those things that were underground and things that were above ground, above ground. Our people did this for 10, 15, 20,000 years. And if you think of that in terms of generations, 800, 900, perhaps 1,000 generations or more. That's how long our people had been here. And our people learned to, knew how to pass knowledge from one generation to the next. And so they had accumulated a lot of knowledge about how to take care of Mother Earth and all living things. And then came the brutal period, the period of the Spanish mission period time, the period of the Mexican period, and the period of the American period. And all 3 of those periods, they wanted to destroy our indigenous knowledge, our culture, our spirituality. They wanted to, they wanted to force assimilation to be citizens of the European country that discovered them. And in our case, that would be Spain, to become citizens of Spain and live as they did, as the Spanish citizens did in Spain, and to become Christians. And there is actually a directive, a papal bull issued by the Pope in 1493. It's known as the Doctrine of Discovery. And that doctrine says that if indigenous people did not assimilate, that they were to be killed. And consequently, millions of indigenous people around the world were killed as a result of that papal bull. The survival rate for our tribe during mission times was in 96%, 95, 96%. In Mission San Juan Bautista alone, over 19,421 of our members were reported as dying at the missions. And that number was provided by a priest 10 years before those missions closed. All 3 of those periods, the Spanish mission period, Mexican period, American period, they all said that they wanted to get the lands back to the tribes, give the lands back to the Indians. That never happened. Today, our tribe is landless. And because of the geographic location of where our tribe is located, very few members of our tribe can afford to live in our traditional tribal territory. What's really interesting is that in 1851, we actually signed a treaty with the federal government. A lot of people don't realize that many tribes signed treaties with the federal government in 1851. But the state of California sabotaged those treaties. They did not want treaties. They did not want reservations. What they wanted was extermination. And that's why they passed a treasury bond, to pay for the extermination of California Indians. And with that money, they paid bounties, 25 cents to $5 for every Indian scalp. And they also paid for militias to go out and hunt down Indians and to kill them. That was a horrendous time for us, but that horrendous time did not stop. Following that, they passed laws to legalize kidnapping of Indian children and laws of indentured servitude, that is slavery. And that law of indentured servitude was not appealed until 1937. There was Indian slavery in California up to 1937. When our people were taking care of Mother Earth, what they learned is that the most important thing is to recognize that Mother Earth is sacred. And it's our responsibility, all of our responsibility, to maintain Mother Earth as sacred. And that's why our people offered prayers and offered ceremonies for Mother Earth. And we had ceremonies to keep balance in the 4 seasons. We had ceremonies for the geese, the migrating geese and the migrating salmon, for the bear, for the deer, for the rabbits. We had ceremonies to pray for them and to pray that our people would be able to take care of them until the last sunrise. Our people learned that it was also one of the most important things as well, was to establish a strong relationship with the land and with all living things. We see the plants, we see the wildlife as our relatives. And our relative, they are relatives because they have the same Mother Earth that feeds and nourishes them. And they have the same Father Sky, that is our Father. And so because we recognize it as a relative, we must treat Mother Earth with love, with kindness. We must talk to it, for example, the plants. We must sing to the plants, pray for the plants, and listen to the plants. They do talk to us and they will tell us what they need. This is what our people learned regarding plants. Very specifically, they learned that plants are responsible for a full community. Every plant has an obligation to a full community, and that full community is taking care of the fungi, the insects, the birds, the four-legged, and people. Seasonally, our diet would be 40% seed. It was very important that we took care of those grasslands, but those seeds were also important for birds and other seed-eating animals. We see fire as a gift. Fire was a gift given to us for a creator. And fire is used for heat. Fire is important for cooking our foods, for warmth. And fire is a very central part of our prayers and our ceremonies. We always have a fire in the ceremonies, and we give our prayers up to the fire, and that smoke from that fire carries our prayers up to Creator. Today, I'll just jump to today. Today, well, let me talk about the early 1900s till like the 1960s, early 70s. During that time, our people basically were working in the fields and the orchards, picking crops and taking care of the crops, etc. Many of our people did not read or write. And so when the Industrial Revolution came, we were truly left behind. And many of our members, and that right there has resulted in poverty and other and other illnesses. In 2003, I became chair, and in 2006, the elders came to a council meeting and said, we must find a way to get back, to fulfill our obligation to take care of Mother Earth and all living things. They said, Creator never rescinded that obligation. And that was confusing. And so, but we did what we always do, because when the elders ask us to consider or to try, that means we must find a way. And so we prayed and we asked Creator to help us. And it wasn't long after that we got invited to Pinnacles National Park to become part of the stewardship of the co-management of Pinnacles. They wanted us to help with the grasslands, to help with the resources such as the basketry plants, and with the condor, to help with the restoration of the condor. At first, that was kind of scary because we had lost so much indigenous knowledge. We were afraid that they're going to just see us as, we were afraid that they were going to see us as being ignorant or dumb. But then we said, we have to recognize that that history that happened to us was not our fault, but we still have the obligation to relearn that knowledge and to go forward. So since that time, we've been working hard to go back, to go back to our territory, to restore that indigenous knowledge and go back to our territory. How do we go back to our territory when you look at the land, when we do not own an inch of land? So how do we go back to our territory? You look at when you look at lands, you see no trespassing, keep out private property, those kinds of things. We had no land and we had no access to land. But so when Pinnacles called us, that was a very important moment in our history in recent times. And so we went in and we started, we told them we're going to need to relearn and that lost knowledge. And so we started learning about how our people took care of the plants. We saw that, the plants knew where they needed to be, so we took care of them there. We didn't see plants here and say they would look better over here, or they would probably do better on that mountaintop, or, in another area. The plants knew where they wanted to be, and also that's where Creator put those plants. And so that's what we did. We took care of the plants where they found them, or where they were. And when we took care of the plants, we took care of plants not only for ourselves and our foods and our medicines and our basket trees and our other kinds of materials such as housing, clothing, etc. We took care of those plants so that they took care of. So they took care of the insects, the fungi, as I said earlier, the birds and the wildlife. We took care of them, so they took care of that. And we would, recognize that they were important food sources, so we would grow that patch bigger and bigger as the populations of these species grew. And that's what we learned, and that's what we're doing today. We are working to restore the native plants. The native plants, the way that we suffer from, because of the current foods that our body have such great difficulty processing, and results in diabetes and obesity and heart and so many other illnesses, the wildlife have that same problem, because when you look at landscapes, 96% of those landscapes are not native. They are, they are plants that have been brought in from Europe or other places, and they're not indigenous to this territory. And the animals have trouble digesting those foods just the same way that we do. And so, our tribe recognized that we needed to restore the native plants. There's another huge benefit to restoring our native plants. Our native plants grew so that they did not need irrigation. They were our food plants, as I said, our medicine plants, and our plants, they were when you look at the landscapes, we see our grocery stores and our pharmacy and our general stores for our hardware stores. That's what we see when we see those landscapes. And And that's the way, and that's the way the plants are taken care of. The native plants, native grasses, for example, they'll develop root systems to go down 15 to 20 feet deep. And that's going to be critically important if we're going to deal with climate change, because those deep root systems allow those plants to be more resistant to fire, to flood, to drought. And because they take care of that full community, they're much more resistant to disease. And that's going to be important for the future for the future. When we look at fire, the way our people would use fire is they would look at a landscape and divide that landscape into 5, 7, 8, 9, 10 different segments, and they would just burn one segment each year. And that kept balancing the resources. There's a lot of plants that rely on fire. So when you burn that area, you would get a high population of those plants. And that was important that way. It also kept down the risk of high fire, of fires. In 2012, our tribe developed that MOU, developed the Amamutsan Land Trust. And then with that, let me go back. Once we started working with Pinnacles and the other people started finding out what we were doing, they came in and wanted to learn what we were doing, and then they wanted the same kind of relationship. And that right there was state parks, the Bureau of Land Management, open space districts, land trust, city and county parks, etc. They wanted to learn from us about how to steward the lands and how we took care of it and what our traditions were. And so and then from there, we started developing memorandums of understanding with those organizations. And today we have access within our territory to over 140,000 acres. And those MOUs that we developed, what we asked for in those MOUs are a number of things. We asked for access, for taking care of cultural and sacred sites. There's a lot of sacred sites and cultural sites that that have been that are under threat or have been destroyed, and we want to protect them as best that we can. Whenever we look at the landscapes for cultural resources, we don't just look at the items as physical items such as a bedrock mortar or something like that. We look at the cultural items such as the items used for foods, items used for paint, items used for medicines, for crafting, etc. Those are important cultural resources as well. So, so we do surveys to identify that, to protect them and to conserve them. We also, have the MOUs allow us to have gatherings, of our tribal members to go back and hold ceremonies and hold prayers at our sacred sites and to study and do research and learn about our cultural sites. The MOU also allows us to do stewardship, to take care of the plant life and take care of the wildlife and take care of the rivers and the streams so that we can make them healthy and restore them and help them heal from the tragic past of the 250 years. That's what our tribe does. That's what our stewardship, that's what our land trust does. We want to, it's important, a couple things, lessons that we learned here is that a lot of the land trust and other ranchers and other private property owners, we believe that they truly want to take care of Mother Earth. But many of them don't know what the heck that means or how to do it. And, and so it's important that we establish relationships with them to help them learn about traditional indigenous stewardship of the lands. Another thing that we had to learn, and it went both ways, was trust. It was so hard for us at the very beginning to trust outside our tribe. Based on that horrible history that we experienced, how could we ever trust? And so our tribe moves slow and we move at our pace and we make that very clear. And and we let them know up front they get one chance. If they blow that one chance, they will not get a second. We will leave and we'll never come back. At least in my, at least in the longer term, according to current day timeframes. We also learned that we need to heal and find a way to go forward. I have a friend of mine, he once told me, he goes, "Well, we were here when they got here and we'll be here when they leave," meaning the colonizers. That's a wonderful thought for us, but the truth is they're not, colonizers will not be going home. And so we have to find a way to go forward. But we can only go forward if we recognize the need to heal. We need to heal from our historic trauma that has resulted from that brutal history. But at the same time, the perpetrators who are responsible for that brutal history, they have to heal from their roles as the perpetrators. In 2015, Pope Francis gave an apology for the sins, crimes, and offenses against the indigenous people. Well, those sins, crimes, and offenses were done not only by the Catholic Church, they were also done by the institutions who passed laws that allow these horrible things to happen to us. And those institutions must heal. Today our tribe is still a landless tribe, but yet many universities, many states and highway offices and buildings and a lot of the infrastructure that's out there now, that's built on indigenous lands. And every day that the non-indigenous put their feet on the ground, they're putting their feet on the ground that has been stolen. So we must find a way to heal from that, and we must find a way to go forward. And that's what we ask. Today, we don't blame the people responsible for that injury to the indigenous people, but we ask them to recognize how much they benefit from that brutal history and to work with indigenous people on healing and finding a path forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Val. Thank you for that very sobering but thoughtful presentation. We're gonna hear now from a Hawaiian perspective. Melilani Oshiro will be our next presenter. And Meli, I believe you have a PowerPoint or a presentation, if you wouldn't mind getting that set up.
Sure.
As we transition here, and I'll be able to share your bio with our attendees. So Melilani has been with the University of Hawaii at Manoa, Department of Human Nutrition, Food and Animal Sciences since 2009. She spent 10 years as the research technician for range and livestock programs, and in 2019 accepted a position as assistant livestock extension agent. Melilani is native of Hawaii Island, where she grew up in Kapulena, a small plantation town on the Hamakua coast. Melilani holds 2 BS degrees in agriculture from UH Hilo and animal science from Massey University in New Zealand, and an MS degree in animal science at UH Manoa, where her studies focused on effects of grazing behavior on production efficiency of grass-finished cattle in Hawaii. And Meli is going to be sharing about Indigenous history, sort of prehistoric and recent from Hawaii. So thank you for being with us, Meli, and go ahead and take it away. I'll try to pin your screen so that we see you predominantly.
All right, everyone can see that good. Yeah, Matthew?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you for the opportunity, I think, to share with you guys a little bit about our history here in Hawaii and land management. Yes, I grew up on the Big Island. This first picture here, I think, is a good, very example of where to start. I think the best way to kind of understand the land management here historically in Hawaii is looking at our Ahupua'a system. And essentially, that's what we would consider watersheds here in Hawaii today. And this picture here is a snapshot of Hi'ilawe waterfalls over in Waipio Valley, which is a very good example of the ahupua here on the islands, which really stemmed from looking from the mountain regions or the Mauka regions of the island, all the way down into Makai, which is our oceans. And the ahupua was really depended on the resources that was in the areas that they were developed, and the Native Hawaiians used those resources to develop these different divisions and use them to manage those resources and the lands that were in there. This is kind of, the ahupua is really the historical method that was used to manage the lands and the systems here in Hawaii. And they really use the resources and the streams and the contours of the land to kind of dictate where these ahupua and land divisions were going to occur. And they would compensate in certain areas. If there were a lack of natural resources, then the land divisions would have been a little bit larger in certain areas. But typically they consisted of these 3 different areas, from our mountain area into the plains and then down into the sea. And typically what happens when it got developed was really a way for them to kind of create these divisions, or what we call here in Hawaii, the palena, which is our boundaries. And they developed that so that we could have a way for the chiefs, who essentially was the overseer of that whole island, had their lower chiefs then manage these ahupua. And within that, we had our land or resource managers, the konohiki. Those people were responsible for these different areas in here. So this picture just kind of dictates one of the markers that they used to use. They both use natural features as markers for our ahupua, which was the summits or peaks of the mountains and ridge crests or streams and other natural features that we can find. And when there wasn't any natural feature that could be put in place, to use these additional markers, and kind of where the name or distinction of the ahupua came from. And that name stands for ahu, is stones or stack or heap or pile of stones. And the pua'a is a representative of a pig. So they would have that image on top of that stack of stones, and also offer a pig or whatnot to the tribute, as a tribute to the chief of that area, or the lower chief to that particular ahupua, as a tax, for that chief. So these boundary markers were used to designate those areas. And these ahupua really serve to help the village and those community members within that village to really be able to properly manage their lands and the use of those lands and the resources that were in them. Really, that lands, from what Val said, you take care of those lands, and those lands were used to support those villages, support the people in there, and the chiefs, and provide tributes to the chiefs within those lower ahupua, as well as the whole entire island. It was a good way for them to increase stability in their agriculture production and the distribution of their subsistence from those areas to support those people. And it really helped to improve and their populations, I guess, to grow their populations and grow the people in there, because they were better able to manage those resources using these different systems, and really using the vegetative zones in there to be most productive for the plants that would grow well in those areas and provide food for their people. It really, even helping have those distinctions, really help to lessen conflict to some extent, and not have those disputes between different ali'i, and then pass it down to different ali'i or the chiefs. As time came on, there was clear, distinct boundaries between those things. And from today, now, when you look at these ahupua, really are what we call moku, or districts in our area, really is reflected off of some of these ahupua that was originally put into land management from historic times. And from those ahupua, they start to realize that there's, what they probably didn't really distinguish as technology at their point in time, but what we refer to now as technology, using those different methods, they were able to kind of increase their food production and intensify the ability to grow more food for the people and the population that had been growing in their villages due to their improved management of their resources and their land. And some of the top 3 or main 3 technologies that we look at and we were able to find from just historical artifacts and whatnot is talked about a lot is our local i'a, or our wild fish ponds. It enabled our, our Native Hawaiians to be able to have a food resource that was abundant for them and close by, so that they could have a good protein source for their people. Another thing that they looked at, or that was discovered, was their lo'i, using the terrace pond fields to use irrigation systems and develop those irrigation systems so they can increase their food production with kalo or the taro in the lo'i patches, and improve that, and almost, 5 times as much taro they can grow in those irrigated systems or other plant crops in those irrigated systems as compared to on the dry land. They also have technologies that they developed in their systematic, like dry land field cultivations, and using those different zones of vegetation to really plant in plants and other foods that would be really productive in that areas, so really planting in and using those vegetative zones for what would be most productive in those areas. So the technologies that they've developed way back when is still what we use today, trying to use our lands for the most profitable things and the most productive things is where we're going to be using it into its best ability, and using it in a well-managed area, and making sure we're making good use of our resources that are there. So if we look back at, that was the Ahupua'a was really essentially the big historical way that the Hawaiians used to manage their lands. And if we look at a quick look at the timeline of other important aspects, the Ahupua'a was really developed as a land managed system pre-contact days, before the Europeans came. They had these systems in play. This picture here is a good example. I did refer to more of the Kona field systems, which is this systematic terracing that they used to do to be able to use the rainfall as a source of irrigation into these different fields, and really kind of marking the different areas on the mountainous ranges that really are be able to use different plants and be productive for those specific areas, planting the banana or the mai'a in certain areas, and wala closer down to the shore where they do well, and then using the rainfall to be able to help irrigate those certain areas. And so these terrace fields are field systems are still quite evident. You can see them around the island, and we still look at it and still have production systems in those areas that are using the natural resources and managing the natural resources there to be most productive for their certain crops. Yeah. After the arrival of the Europeans and Captain Cook's arrival, the populations were really flourishing here on the islands. The villages were very large. People will be able to have more subsistence because of their use and management of the land, and the ability to use the land to produce the foods to its best ability in those areas. And, after more voyagers came here, about 10 years later, it's when livestock was kind of first introduced in 1793 by Captain George Vancouver. He gifted the first amount of cattle and some other livestock to Kamehameha I, the Great. And when he did that, they put a kapu on the animals that was here, especially with the cattle, so they couldn't slaughter. So they could not, they put a ban on it. They couldn't slaughter any of the animals. Well, the animals started to be able to proliferate in the forest areas. And as they got larger and larger, the herds got larger, they started to come into the areas and become to be more of a threat to the people that was there. And at this time, the Europeans came, there was more introduction of more industrialized agriculture, or just equipment that people could use to be more productive in their growing of food and subsistence for their families or their villages. So in about 1830 is when the kapu got lifted. Queen Kahumanu and Kamehameha III realized that this was becoming more of a threat of these cattle that were here, and they needed to start to slaughter these animals before they started to really destroy the land and the resources that was out there. So once that kapu was lifted, they also brought in the vaqueros, which really helped to teach the Hawaiians how to handle and manage the cattle. They developed corral systems using these terraced walls to be able to contain animals in certain areas, and really develop that land management system for these grazing animals and using them as well in the areas that maybe they couldn't grow so much vegetative crops and whatnot, and keeping them out of the areas that was doing well in their vegetation or crop production. And by the mid 1800s, sugarcane became plantations started off in Hawaii, and the first viable one was in 1835. Our forestry started to take effect, and the first law that was passed, sandalwood is a hardwood that was harvested a lot. We started to have more ships, whaler ships come through the islands that would, need certain materials and whatnot, and things started to get harvested. So there was a first law that was passed that kind of protected our forestry system to kind of stop the harvesting of that sandalwood and our natural trees in those area. All during this time, the industrialization of agriculture, using heavy equipment and machinery to kind of increase that production, just led to different types of methods of managing the lands, and larger pieces of land that began to get managed for different types of large crop production, such as the sugarcane. Another big event in the 1800s and kind of about the mid 1800s was our Great Mahele. Mahele stands for land division or distribution, and the King Kamehameha III saw this time proposed this time as a redistribution of the Hawaiian lands. And it was almost one of the, second to one of the biggest events in our Hawaiian history compared to our overthrow. And it was intended to provide sort of secure title to Hawaiians, although not all of it really sort of went to the Hawaiians. There was a separation of the lands between government lands, crown lands, kuleana lands for the commoners, and but it was a period where the lands got redistributed, and people were able to have private land ownership. And then some of those lands, then got into other types of crop production, or sugarcane production or pineapple production. So by the late mid 1900s, sugar, pineapple, and some other crops, coffee, macadamias, all started to flourish in Hawaii. And a lot of the land was managed for that, alongside with our livestock, that was used for additional tourists and visitors that were coming to the island, was really what was helping to provide the subsistence for those folks as well. But they were all very much an important part of our Hawaii's economy. By the late 1990s, although our sugarcane and pineapple was flourishing, by the late 1990s, many of these plantations started closing down. The cost of the infrastructure and maintaining labor and everything just kind of overtook the profitability of these different entities, and even some of the issues with land tenureship and also came into play of some of the closures of these different plantations. The vacant lands then sat fallow for some areas. Some were sold into commercial properties, other went into real estate, and some did remain into farmlands. Some of these lands were connected back from the Great Mahele, and you can trace them back to those different government or crown lands. So some of the lands that were in plantation did also go back into those different government lands. And today now we kind of sit at our latest census, or 2017, we haven't gotten the next one out, but about 8% of our state agriculture lands are used for growing crops. About 18.5% are used for grazing animals. And we have about 8% that are still in our natural forests. And others there's a small portion of the other piece of our land, about 8%, that is for farmstead, and does include our farm steads or homestead lands and other livestock facilities. So we still have some portion that is still in there, but where do we go from there, and how does that reflect back to our Hawaiian, our native Hawaiian farms? There's in our last census, there's about 7,300 different farms or total farms in Hawaii. And 32% of that belong to or are managed by either Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islanders, or part Hawaiian folks. And of that, majority of them are on small lands. They're 1 to 9 acres. And they're both in crop production majority and also livestock production. So, we have to continue to look at those lands and provide support, and in my position, that's what we like to do, is reach out and, provide the support for those, our Indigenous folks that are still trying to manage that land and use that land for subsistence, either for their families or, in a financial means to help meet their financial need for their families, and looking at different support regions, with cooperative extension, we can really, I think, need to provide those needs for them and really be there to support their ability to continue to manage those lands to the best resources that they have there, and even working with NRCS and the connections there really help to help continue to support our Native people to be able to manage those lands. And I'm not going to speak much about Department of Hawaiian Homes lands, but that's one area that does help to be able to provide land for our Native Hawaiians here in Hawaii. And there will be somebody that's going to speak about that. And you'll also get to hear a little bit from one of our Native Hawaiian producers. So I'm not going to talk much about that, but that's sort of where our Hawaiian land management system started off and kind of where we are today. And yeah, so I don't know if anybody has any questions. I'm going to stop at that. Matthew?
Melly, thank you so much. Such a fascinating history, that one that I personally am fairly ignorant to. So I'm just really grateful for you to be able to summarize that and open that up and create sort of open up our webinar this afternoon. I know that you are not able to stay through to the panel, and so if there are attendees who have a question for Melly, I would encourage you to ask that in the Q&A. And just generally for folks, as we move forward, the Q&A is open and you're welcome to add questions. So please do that. Again, thank you, Melly.
Thank you.
So we're going to transition to our third opening speaker. Hillary Rennick is an alumni of the Indigenous Food Initiative at the University of Arkansas as an LLM fellow. She received her JD from the University of Oregon School of Law, her BA from American University, and is an enrolled member of Sherwood Valley Rancheria, Hopland Chanel, Noyo River Indian, and Fort McDermott Paiute Shoshone communities. Hillary's work is focused on land, air, water, cultural resources, and traditional hunting, fishing, gathering protections. So Hillary, thank you so much for being here this afternoon. Are you able to turn your video on and share your presentation?
Yes.
Excellent. So whenever you're ready, please take it away.
Sure. Yeah. So welcome everyone, and thank you, Val, for such an eloquent beginning, and then Melanie for some of the information on the Native Hawaiian homelands. Very interesting. So my name is Hillary Rennick, and I am Pomo Paiute from Northern California, Mendocino, if folks know where we're at. And so I am in another life, like a liaison and on many different things. Yeah, I speak with some of the states and federal partners. And so I work with folks on different levels. And so I do know that there is the push towards co-management partnerships, all these great things. But I also am aware that folks come into working with Indigenous communities with either no knowledge, some knowledge, or stereotypes. I myself am a product of the California school system, so I understand what is basically like silent, left out, right? So I start at the Papal Bulls. And so I know Val, Chairman Lopez did mention the Papal Bulls, and they are really important because this was the authority where many Indigenous societies was most affected, right? Our lands were looked at as terra nullius, as vacant, because in many cases we were not treated as humans, right? And so this affects the land system, the bifurcation and the division of all the problems, right, that we see today. And so one of the things that happens, like yesterday, I was talking to some folks from the USGS, and there was some folks that wanted to, just start talking to tribal nations, and they, some of them said like, okay, what do we call you? And so, so Indian is a term of art. It's a legal term, and so of course, wherever you're working, ask the people what they want to be called, right? So if they want to be called from their tribal nation, or it all depends how you're working with those other tribal nations, right? And so the term Indian is in the governing documents of the United States. First in the Declaration of Independence, Merciless Indian Savages, and then in the Constitution. And so, the laws are made three different ways in regards to Indians: Congress, the Supreme Court, or the executive branch. And CFR 25 is where you will find a lot of the governing information on Indians. And so, with the Papal bulls, sometimes folks will say, I had no idea that until the passage of the American Indian Religious Freedom Act that you are not allowed to engage in certain practices. And this comes into that issue comes when people want to work with tribes and there is no relationship already built. They want to know, right? They want to extract resources. They want to extract information. And sometimes folks don't understand the history, like Mr. Lopez stated, right? Of why there is a lack of trust, right? And why folks would not be initially so excited to go and share information, right? So sometimes, folks, even myself having worked on many fires, and when you're engaging in consultation, folks say, well, go talk to the tribe and get all the information, find out. It's like, whoa, hold on, right? So we have to look at the different structure. What happened, what is going on, and how do we get to a better place in the future, right? So first, the division of the lands, right? So many of you folks on, right, you're looking at maps, you're probably, one of the, looking at different disciplines. So you're looking at the landscape through a different lens. And because the landscape is of course, it's not flat like the map, right? We're looking at that there's a lot of different diversity going on. However, the map, right, is very flat. And so beginning, of course, with the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, looking at the grid that we all look at. And I know today with Avenza and a lot of the other maps, we have all maps on our phone, there's maybe perhaps a skill of map reading that is, now I don't know what you would say, old school or something, but still, we're looking at this grid, right? And how does it affect Indian country? Because at the same time as the removal, right? So tribal nations, indigenous people were being removed during this time, right? So they're being divested of their land, and the land being reallocated and given out to new land users that are looking at the land in a very different way, depending, of course, on their resources, where they came from, and then also the laws, right? The Homestead Act. How did you get that land? In California, I spent a lot of time in the National Archives and just looking at some of the land titles. And really interesting. I'm from Mendocino, like I said before. And so, how they divested Mendocino Reservation, which is my reservation, was you had a non-tribal person and they just needed two other non-tribal witnesses, men, to sign that they are making good use of the land. And what does that mean? That means building a fence, often with slave labor, and irrigating the land. And then they just needed to sign off for each other. And so that's how they got some of the land. And so why is this important? All these different acts it's not, sometimes folks will say, oh gosh, that was a long time ago, but there's really living consequences now, right? So with the Dawes Act, right? Again, stopping or at least stifling that transmission of knowledge through time, right? So again, looking at the Alta California, where folks were, it was the newspaper in early California, and they talk about, like one of the headlines, the savages are burning the forest again, right? The savages are burning the forest again. And let's go and shoot, like the boys went up and stopped that really quick. But what does that mean? It's really interesting, and to look at myself as a California person, a California Indian, that even though people were in duress, they were under great stress, being removed from ancestral homelands, being hunted because of the gold rush, that people felt so strongly that they needed to take care of the landscape that they risked their lives to go and still backburn, because tribal nations, just like mainstream society, just like other municipalities, we have our doctors, our lawyers, our medicine people, right? You have the pharmacy, you have your medicines, you have people that know how to take care of everything, right? From the ecology, taking care of us, right? When we pass on, everybody has their place. And so through the native lens, we believe that the creator did that so that we need each other, right? So that, because if everybody's the same, we don't need each other. So the only way we have community, and healthy community, right, is to go and have different skills, to work together, to teach our children, to get the information from those that are wise, our elders, right? We don't send them out to pasture. They stay as part of our governing council, right? So what was happening, right? So I know sometimes we'll look at a map and we're like, it's so flat, right? So the same thing of the map of the Indian reservations, it's like static and it's stuck in time, right? It's stuck in 1850 or it's stuck in 1880. But what was happening was this dynamic movement across the landscape, the moving of nutrients, right? And just like, from the butterfly to the pollinators to the large land-based animals, just like bison, right? They were made for that landscape, as the bison's hooves were aerating the soil going across the landscape, right? We even had buffalo northeastern California, right, up in the Modoc Plateau. And what that did is taking those nutrients and moving them, right, in sync with everything else that's going along, with the fungus, with the Pacific flyway, right? All how the birds are moving, and nothing was static. So again, moving those nutrients across landscape from small trade centers to larger trade centers. Just like today, we got small cities, we got big cities. People come, they trade, they look at the newest fashion, right? They find a spouse, they go and they teach their children about how to live in society. The same thing happened as we're moving backwards through time. Certain places on the landscape have energy, right? Looking at the drawing on the right, looking at the Del Solilo trade network, that is where like the most dams are on that Columbia River system. Certain places, that energy is on the landscape. It's the change in the stratigraphy, it's the change in the geography, the geology. There's a lot happening right there. And it happened 12,000 years ago right there, right? And even as we go towards the future and look at, what is the future of energy development, of our, society, looking at our foods, this trade on the landscape, the health of the whole continent has to be looked at, right? And the need for different scientists, different people, different points of view, different lenses to look through is so important even as we go through time, right? So again, I'm from Mendocino, but I've been to archaeological sites in North Dakota and South Dakota where I found abalone earrings, just like I have on, and so it's amazing to go to like an old village site of 8,000 years ago, thinking that, hey, am I the first California person here? No, I am one of many, right? Over thousands of years. And so part of my work is looking at the health of the landscape. I know Val mentioned the plants, right? And so one of our teachings is that if you live in a sustained place over time, if you're living in your same house, right, 10 years, that the plants that naturally come to you, those are the plants and medicines that your body needs, whether it's dandelions, whatever it is, that the natural landscape, even though in property law has been historically looked at as like, the common enemy is water, right? But like, no, like you are part of that system, that fabric, that big quilt of just everything. And those medicines will come to you to nourish you, because the natural environment is not your enemy, right? We're the ones that have to learn to live within that, right? And so the drawing on the left is just an example. Again, we're not static, we're moving through time, but is one rendition of the multitude of California tribal nations that are within the political boundaries of what we call California, because the political and the cultural boundaries do not line up, right? Those tribes on the edges, the Shastas, the Modocs, the Northern Paiutes, they don't just stop at the line, right? Just like the landscape doesn't just stop, like the desert doesn't stop in the Chimoevi area or the southern Shoshone area, right? Or down in the San Diego area, the Kumeyaay area, it doesn't just stop at the border. So again, just looking at the change, the water storage, the California Central Valley Water Project, and what that does, right? It's a living, breathing system, taking the lungs out of like this really abundant state. And what that does, just, when I talk to students, I always like, try to get them involved. Sometimes folks will say like, well, I don't know about this and that. No, you don't have to know about everything. You just have to be aware, because all of us have a part to ensure that generations down the road still exist. And so this is just a really quick switch to acknowledge the access issue. So myself as a California Indian person, and as we go and try to still eking out existence in our homelands. What's important to me is come from a family of basket weavers, is just access, right, to riparian areas that are so important, right? We used to even burn our riparian areas, and people don't think about it because they just think of burning the forest or maybe the prairies, but every single part so important for the whole system, right? Of course, cultural burning, getting, the acorns, right? The health of the trees, down to the roots, down to the fungus. And so this is one example of a ticket that occurred, part of like a dragnet where geofencing is being used by the state of California to find folks that are allegedly taking forest and traditional plants, salmon, just like the 60s, it's still happening right now. Geofencing where They're getting warrants for Facebook, Google, all your messages without your consent. It is happening to a lot of California Indian people, and during COVID, the lockdown, there was an increase in Fish and Wildlife Service tickets to California Indian people that are often the most vulnerable, right? Living rural parts of the state, taking care of extended family, elders, children needing extra nutrients. And of course, when people are stressed, they go back to what grandma had, right? Grandma wants acorn mush, grandma wants seaweed. The state of California said, no, those seasons are closed. So historical tribal land management, as Chairman Lopez mentioned, that many tribes are now returning without fear of being shot at, right, by the settlers, and having to work in collaboration with land management agencies, whether that be state, private, federal, because at this point, even though we have found that 12,000 years of taking care of the landscape, we did it in a way that it looked so good. Some settler journals coming into the LA basin said that they believed that the divine creator put those crops there for them, not knowing that was all set, right? That was a very managed landscape. From the pollinators to the soils to the back burning to harvest times to letting those crops rest, to having the children out there, having that intergenerational knowledge transfer, and even having other tribes come. Central Valley tribes come to my area during the late summer, and they come and we trade, and it's been happening like that since, in our opinion, since time began. So, to read the landscape, how important it is, inclusion, it's always important. Once you get to a certain point, always reach back and try to bring up people with you. And of course, looking at soil health is so important. And then also when you're out on the landscape, acknowledging that also people have been there before you, right? And it's so easy to get into pseudoscience because it's like YouTube and all the videos out there just show some extravagant stuff, but like really, just imagining that there is an invisible easement of just, respecting that people came before you, and what is that, whatever is there, just to respect it, right? You just go take a picture of antelope fencing area, or like a rabbit hunting area, but there's no need to there's no need to remove the rocks. There's no need to just walk lightly, consult, talk to people, get the information. Here's a picture of my aunt. We went out just to get basketry material. I think that day there's a couple people that asked us, "What are you doing? Get off my land." It's like they weren't using that area. It was right by the road. So I'd argue it was like easement, Caltrans easement probably. But just how important, right? The picture on the right is huckleberries. Huckleberries in the north part of the state grow great right after a fire. The crops are good. I think we saw like 2 bears that day, right? Again, just respecting, I'm not shooting at the bears. I'm in their homeland. Again, not just from the tribal world, we're not just partnerships and collaborations with other people and other agencies, but also like respecting what's out there, right? I'm also just a guest in that land. So anyways, when working with tribal nations, just acknowledging some stuff, right? Acknowledging the history, the very recent history. My grandmother was born in 1900, and her band was they're prisoners of war, you know? And so it wasn't a long time ago. It was like I heard these stories in my lifetime growing up. So just acknowledge that, that to work with tribal nations, it's relationship building, it's trust. And just like everyone else, there's some people you're going to sync with and other people you're not. So don't feel like you have to be everybody's friend. Just like mainstream society, we come in all shapes and sizes and personalities. So just take heart that, like, I don't know everything about my tribe. There's men's societies, there's a whole different layer. There's different families that have different songs. I talked to some tribes that have been removed from their homelands. They don't remember some things about how to manage their landscape, but they still have the songs and they still have the language. So it's still very important to them. So just acknowledge like what's out there. And you know, if we have students on, there's so much to learn. It's such an exciting time. It really is up to you to make sure that we have a good future and that we have those future generations. So thank you. That's all I got.
Thank you, Hillary. What a truly fascinating presentation, and really appreciate your sort of detailed deep dive into the history, and just stunning to see the way the ticket that you received for just practicing your Indigenous ways. So again, thank you for being here and for sharing your perspective. You actually also, I wanted to remind you, already have a question in the Q&A if you wouldn't mind responding to that inquiry. So that concludes sort of the first part of our webinar, and I want to thank the three speakers who have kind of set the stage for the conversation that we'll continue to have over the next little less than 2 hours. We're going to pivot some and focus on a couple of case studies, we're calling them, but basically just examples of what we're hoping to discuss today, which is what do Indigenous partnerships on rangelands and practicing rangeland stewardship look like. And so the first case study is from Hawaii, and we're going to have to audible a little bit because James Dupont, who's with the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, it turns out is unable to participate today, all in person, or maybe live, I should say. So instead, we are going to hear some of his audio with some slides that Jill, the current CalPAC president, has prepared. And I also want to say that I'm just thrilled that Zanga was able to join us on Zoom. Zanga is a native Hawaiian rancher who's going to be sort of co-presenting, I suppose, with Jill and with James in absentia. And I do have, Zanga sent me a bio for him, so I just kind of want to go through that. Zanga runs an operation, LLC Z-Bar Ranch, and I understand that he started ranching full-time in June of 2006, and before 2006 was a part-time rancher for many years. He worked for 26 years as the general manager for Halakea Farms, and it was after those 26 years that he went into full-time ranching in 2006. He grew up on his father's ranch, Lazy Five Ranch in Kamuela, Waimea. Grew up since 1965, he says, and he's always loved the ranch life and rodeos, and those things are still going strong today. And so Zanga, at the appropriate point, if you wouldn't mind turning your video back on, but I believe that Jill, and you'll have to describe how this audible is going to work, but I think, Jill, you're going to start with sort of filling in for James with his presentation.
That's correct. I do want to share. Do I just hit share screen? Oh, there we go. Okay, and let me know when you can see that.
We are seeing it.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is run a recording, and it's from Jim Dupont, who is the supervisor for the Department of Hawaiian Homelands West Hawaii District. So I'm going to go ahead and play his recording, and then I'll come back on at the end. And in the interim, I'll be very quiet to hopefully give you guys the best ability to hear this.
Good morning and happy holidays to everyone. Sorry I couldn't make this meeting in person, but I'm in transit on a vacation. So my name is James Dupont. I'm the West Hawaii District Office Supervisor for the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. Hawaiian Homelands was created by the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act of 1920, enacted by Congress to protect and improve the lives of Native Hawaiians. Prince Jonakuhio Kalaniaole was a non-voting member of Congress at that time, and he lobbied Congress to set aside land for the rehabilitation of Native Hawaiians. There's approximately 206,000 acres of land across the state on the 5 major islands, and I'm on the island of Hawaii, which is why they call it the Big Island. So on the island of Hawaii, or specifically in West Hawaii, I oversee approximately 100,000 acres. The majority of those lands are at this point non-homesteaded, but as far as lands dedicated to pastoral or ranching use, there's 57,000 acres on the slopes of Mauna Kea, approximately 10,000 acres in around Waimea or Kamawela, and another 9,000 acres in Kauai High. The Hawaiian Homes Commission Act allows Native Hawaiians, those individuals determined to be not less than 50% Hawaiian, to get their names on a wait list. And that wait list allows them to apply for residential, agricultural, or pastoral leases. The department issued the first pastoral allotment in 1952 in the Pu'ukapu area and also near Honoka'a. Those awards were approximately 300 acres in size. Each of our leases, whether they're residential, agricultural, or pastoral, are 99-year leases at $1 a year lease rent. So it doesn't matter which type of lease you have, it doesn't matter what size of lot you have, whether it's 10,000 square feet or 300 acres, the lease rent is set at $1 a year. The department asks individuals that are receiving these pastoral awards to submit a ranch plan. So they're required to advise the department of their plans to utilize these parcels of property. The administrative rules require each individual to utilize 2/3 of the award, specifically in this case for ranching. So again, if you have 300 acres, you have to dedicate at least 200 acres towards ranching. We do allow people to use a portion of the lot for farming as long as that farming is to support their family. It's not intended to be commercial. And none of our homestead leases, especially in today's climate, would be or could be considered commercial. Again, a number of our homesteaders have utilized state programs, loan programs, and a majority of them have been working with USDA, NRCS, FSA to obtain financing to support their ranching activities. And so my office or any of our offices take in applications, and then we oversee these leases, and then we support our offices. The home office is located on the island of Oahu. I've been with the department since 1985, and I've been in the West Hawaii District Office since 1992. So there's been a number of changes. Again, I mentioned earlier that the initial award for pasture leases took place in 1952. The second offering did not happen until 1990. And those awards were reduced substantially down to 10, 15, 20, 100, and 200 acre parcels. And over time, and you can take a look at the Act's initiation in 1921. Over the years, more and more people have taken advantage of the program and applied for homestead leases. So prior to 1985, when I started, there was very little activity happening. And then the department, again through Congress, decided to accelerate the award of lots. So in 1985-86, we started off with residential and agricultural leases. In 1990, we made the awards, the second award of pastoral leases in Waimea and also in the Kahu area, which is in East Hawaii. So again, the individual ranchers are expected to utilize their parcels, their leases, strictly for ranching purposes. And I think any of you that are in ranching realize that depending where your lands are situated, the time of year, the climate, you go through cycles where at times you're in the rainy season and at other times, depending on the year, you go through these climate changes where you experience extended periods of drought. And again, to the extent that the department can assist people, we do what we can, but Mother Nature and drought conditions are very difficult to deal with, especially if it's not raining, the grass isn't growing. It gets very expensive if the cattle can't graze on the parcels that you have, or you have to bring in feed. And needless to say, being in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, the majority of the feed, the majority of most of our needs are shipped in from the west coast of the U.S. So I'm, happy that Hawaiian Homes is able to participate in this presentation today, and you'll be hearing directly from one of our homesteaders in Pu'ukapu. One of the things that the department allows is if someone is not directly using their homestead lease, they are able to make another arrangement, which we call a third-party agreement, where another Native Hawaiian can come in and utilize the lands that may not otherwise be used for ranching. So Zenga Shuri has taken advantage of that, and he has access to probably more than 500 acres. But again, depending on the climate conditions, he's moving cattle around, and I'll let Zenga explain how he's been able to manage.
I fear perhaps Jill has frozen. And Zenga, you're on mute if you're able to take yourself off mute.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Welcome. Yeah, we can hear you.
Welcome.
Thank you so much for being here. I don't know if I hope Jill will be able to unfreeze herself. I don't know if you feel comfortable moving forward as she figures that out.
Not a problem. I don't know what there's some good presentations earlier. So anyway, just rancher, just trying to make a living out here, homesteader.
I was pleased that I was a little worried about the sound quality of Jim's presentation, but I was able personally to hear most of it, and wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing your personal history a little bit, maybe specifically about how you've interacted with the Department of Hawaiian Homelands and what that experience has been like.
So you want me to tell you the truth then? No, I'm kidding. It's been good. Jim's been a real big asset for us out here. Like I've been in ranching business all my life. Grew up on a ranch, my dad's ranch, and that ranch started, I think, in 1965. And throughout the years, I've just been in and out of ranching as I grew to adulthood and so on. But we lived and was raised on a homestead, 300 acres. I was able to learn from my dad to learn how to work with cattle and so on, and raise them, of course, and then also to go accumulate some lands that homesteaders weren't using for one reason or another. Mostly was because their parents were in ranching, the kids weren't, and when the parents moved on, the kids just didn't want to ranch, so that's how we was able to go ahead and accumulate some homestead lands from different homesteaders. So we kind of kicked off that way, and that's where the Department of Hawaiian Homes has helped. And also NRCS and Farm Service agencies, they all help us to get by, especially in our drought situations and so on. But as far as the homestead lands, I've been able to make it a business. It started in 2006 full time, and my son Kawoi works for me, and Paul Chow is another employee that are here on the ranch, on Seabar Ranch. And we took some cattle that was available to us from Peter Baldwin on Maui several years ago, probably in 2007 or 8, and they're pure Angus cows that he brought in from a ranch in Colorado, Diamond Peak Ranch, and we bought about 100 of those cows, and then we're at a commercial herd of crossbred cattle, and when we bought this purebred Angus herd, I decided to just go full time in the Angus line, and was able to do 14 or 15 generations out of that one herd. So our herds are all made up of a seed stock that came out of that Colorado herd. And so today we run about 700 Angus cows, and we've been very blessed. So that's kind of where we've been in this past years.
And Zenga, is your story relatively unique, or has the Department of Hawaiian Homelands allowed other Native Hawaiians to ranch and be involved in agriculture in the way that you are?
We're blessed to grow up here in Waimea. So we have a relationship with a lot of our neighbor ranchers. So growing up, we were able to establish a relationship that helped myself to accumulate their lands when they weren't using it, was vacant. The two things that are win-win on this is that one, they're not into ranching, but they get to receive some revenue, income coming off of their property, owning that homestead. So I lease a bunch of them right now. I thank Hawaiian Homes from going from homesteader to homesteader, Hawaiian to Hawaiian, versus in the past where leases were out to anyone that would want to lease it. So I think today, like Jim was saying, it's homestead to homestead or Hawaiian to Hawaiian. And that gives us a better opportunity to accumulate lands that we need to for our livelihood. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
Would you say that? No, you did, absolutely. Would you say that you ranch as a Native Hawaiian differently than someone who isn't Native Hawaiian, or are there ways in which you've incorporated, some of your ancestral practices, or not?
Well, I think each homestead, they learn from their parents and they raise their cattle that way. So we have a code here where we say we write for the brand that anytime we would go on to another person's ranch, It's whether they're doing it what we think is right, wrong, bad, or good. It's their way, and we respect that as a rancher to rancher. So I wouldn't say my way is the right way. This is the way I grew up and learned. I'm sure the rest of the ranchers have done the same. I always believe that we can always learn from each other to get better and more knowledge. And if asked the question, what do I think? Then I would answer a question. But other than that, I pray never step over my boundaries when I go to somebody else's ranch. So the way I raised today is from, but we had seminars from the Cattlemen's Association and good practices from NRCS and not overstocking and making sure we have a good mat there for our cattle and being able to cut back on numbers so that there's enough adequate feed for drought times and so on. So all of those things.
Zenga, do you feel like the Hawaiian homeland system works for Native Hawaiians, or are there additions or changes that you would make to the system?
Well, I just wish we had more lands that we could utilize for those that are involved in this industry with this business. We could always use more land, and I know that's something that has been short of. We went from back when my dad got their 300 acres, then he went down to 200 acres, then he went to 100, then he went to 20 to 15 to 10. And you can ranch on 10 acres, right? I mean, you can run a cow or two, but I just wish there were more lands available so that other ranchers like myself, if they wanted to expand, they could. And so I'm like myself are looking at outside lands with whether it's Kamehameha schools or whatever is available out there. I'm trying to investigate and research and see if that'll work for my program.
And is that because those lands are being taken up by development, say, or because there's just limited lands available for Native Hawaiians through the Homelands program?
Just limited lands for homesteaders, yeah, for Hawaiians, and there's not enough there for someone to want to run a full-time business in. So that's why a lot of times I was growing up was part-time in it, because 300 acres in Waimea, you can run one animal unit to probably 3 acres of land so that you're not overgrazing or overstocking. That could generate, where today's market is, probably about 40-something thousand gross, and it just wasn't enough to make it full-time. So I've always worked a full-time job and did it part-time, and didn't dive into it to about 2006, where I was able to accumulate X number of land acreage where I could make it a full-time business.
We need to think about transitioning to our next presenters, but I'm wondering, Jill, I know you dropped off, and Mahele, if you're still there, are there any parting thoughts or last questions that for Zenga, or parting thoughts that you'd like to leave us as we think about sort of Native Hawaiian management in Hawaii?
This is Jill. I would just like to maybe hit on a few of the points that, I'm sorry when my presentation dropped off. As far as there are some eligibility requirements for Hawaiian home lessees. The first one is that they need to be 18 years or older. And then the second is that they must be Native Hawaiian, described as any descendant of not less than half part blood of the races inhabiting the Hawaiian Islands previous to 1778. So this means that you have to have a quantum blood of 50%.
50%, yes.
And then, yeah, it's a pretty strict, and a difficult thing as more and more time goes on. Leaseholders are usually able to benefit from additional things such as exemptions from property taxes or exemption of land tax, low interest loans, and like Jim said, the annual lease rent of $1 for regardless of the size. There's also an option to extend the lease for an additional 100 years, allowing for generational transfers. And then one of the best things I think is that, they do sign landowner concurrences to participate in farm bill programs, which Xanga has participated in. And so, there are ways that the DHHL can support as well as allow us to support, which is really great because, then we can get some federal assistance out there on that land. So I will make my presentation available, or you can, Matthew, so that other people can see the slides that do have some of the pictures they might want to see of examples of the practices, including I think the last slide in the deck is one of Xanga's ranch where he's done some extensive invasive species control on one of our nasty little plants that has come in with hydro mulch we call fireweed. But it does have a toxin in it, which can be, pretty detrimental to our livestock. So Xanga's done an exceptional job out there as a range manager, which is one of the reasons I really wanted him on, because he goes above and beyond. And I think in his words that he used, such as, cutting back on the cattle to allow for a nice mat, which is our kikuyu grass we grow basically in this basin, or the area that most of the Hawaiian homelands are located for grazing. But it's just a great example of sort of the partnerships that, we all try to support each other in Hawaii's kind of local ag community. And I can't thank Xanga enough for taking time out of his extremely busy day.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it, Xanga, and I appreciate Jim for doing everything he could do to make this meeting. Unfortunately, when daylight saving kicks in, it kind of throws us all over here for a major loop. And so thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Melly. Thank you, everybody from Hawaii. I so appreciate you all. And that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, my dear.
Thank you so much, Xanga, for your participation. Jill, thank you for making it work. Melly, did you want to leave us with a parting thought?
No, I mean, I think Jill really wrapped it up. It's limited lands, and that's where we kind of stand today. But the folks that are managing the lands do very well at reaching out for the support to help be the good resource managers that they are. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you again, all. It's really nice to be able to include the Hawaiian perspective in our California Pacific section meeting. I know that pre-COVID, I was hoping that one of these meetings, I assumed would be in person, could have been in Hawaii. So this is, I guess, the next best thing. So thanks again for participating. We are going to transition to our second case study, and that will include two individuals, Bill Leahy and Brian Hogan. And I think, Bill, hello, welcome. I think you're going to be presenting your screen, and maybe while I read your bios, you wouldn't mind setting that up. Looks like we have video and sound from you, Bill, not yet from you, Brian. But Bill is part of the Nature Conservancy, and he rejoined TNC in September of 2019 to serve as the Deputy Director of the Jack and Laura Endangerment Preserve, which is at Point Conception in Santa Barbara County, California. Bill previously worked with the Conservancy from 1992 to 2003 in various leadership positions directing land protection and regional landscape conservation efforts in Southern California and the Central Coast. Since 2003, Bill served as the Big Sur Land Trust Executive Director for 10 years, where he successfully repositioned the Big Sur Land Trust to serve a more diverse and relevant community constituency while increasing the impact, pace, and scale of its land protection in Monterey County. And Bill, with his wife, Lorian, also a TNC alum, and their border collie, Mabel, are all living on the Endangerment Preserve. And Brian Hogan is a member of the San Ynez Band of Chumash Indians and serves as the Nature Conservancy's Archaeological Research Advisor and Cultural Liaison at the Endangerment Preserve. Brian is also a doctoral candidate in the Anthropology Department at UCSB. So pleased that the two of you can join us. I'm gonna pin your videos so that we see you, and please take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew, for hosting this. Really terrific. I'm sorry we're not in person, but this terrific conference. It's so weird doing this without really seeing everybody. And I'm going to apologize in advance. I have a terrible internet connection, which will freeze up on me occasionally. It doesn't seem to kick me out, which is good. But I've asked my colleagues, Brian and Laura, who's in the audience, to text me if all of a sudden I'm frozen, so that I can pause and wait till I come back live. So I may turn my video off in a sec just to preserve bandwidth, if that's okay, as I go through the slides. But I wanted to thank the speakers that has sort of set up the day here and really present a kind of a diversity of great models and ways of thinking about moving forward in this, I think, very exciting time. You know, I'm greeting you today from the ancestral homelands of the Chumash people. The Jack and Lauren Endangerment Preserve is, which was set up in 2000, which was acquired by the Nature Conservancy in 2017, thanks to the generosity of Jack and Laura Endangerment and a lot of other donors who they inspired. We've been able to secure a very unique place at the center of the Chumash world, if you will. And as we, I want to just acknowledge very humbly that the tagline here says a living laboratory to increase understanding. I think we, as a Nature Conservancy and our partners, know we have a lot of work to do to increase our understanding about how you know, we pursue the challenge that was laid down by Chairman Lopez at the top of this meeting, which is, you know, how do we seek a common path to healing and working with one another to engage in both contemporary conservation, preservation, restoration, and cattle grazing practice, and do that also in tandem and together with folks who bring a lot of traditional indigenous knowledge and wisdom that will help us create a better outcome at the end of the day. And actually, as Brian Hogan likes to use, sort of a modern conservation movement, if you will. I really do appreciate that. And so I'm going to give you all a pretty high level, rapid tour of the Endangerment Preserve, and then I will transfer the mic over to Brian so that he can talk a little bit about the work he's doing with us as we really take the first very, very baby steps forward in you know, again, to Chairman Lopez's comments earlier, how do we move at the speed of trust out here to ensure that we're doing things correctly and humbly and thoughtfully as we look to increase our relationship and reconnection to this place, both cultural and natural resources. So again, thanks. So I'm gonna shut off my video if you don't mind, and then get through these slides, hopefully without any ado. Can everybody, can you hear me all? Matthew?
We can hear you, Bill. Thank you.
Perfect. Just checking. I'll check from time to time. So as I, oh, come on. Okay. So the Jack and Laura Endangerment Preserve sits right at a really interesting convergence of biological diversity. The Nature Conservancy's mission historically has been focused on how we conserve, preserve, protect the biodiversity of planet Earth, and accomplish that at the most important places in the world. The Jack and Laura Endangerment Preserve sits at this really amazing convergence of north and south, both on the ocean and on the land, which sets up a really interesting opportunity to learn and expand our capacity to know how natural systems are going to behave and how we can manage and steward them in a way when the climate is changing so rapidly. We have such extraordinary impact in terms of sea level rise, increasing drought, increasing change in weather patterns, including the atmospheric rivers that we're experiencing even this week in Northern California for sure, and a little bit of that here today. You know, the landscape here we see in the ocean, for example, with the Northern California current, you know, roaring down from vast distances, this extraordinary meeting of different ecosystems in the ocean, as well as on land. This is the northernmost extent, for example, of the southern of the Roadrunner coast on the coast of Southern California. It's the southernmost extension of tan oak, the edge range of tan oak from the central coast. There are Dungeness crab on the west-facing shoreline of the preserve. There's spiny lobster on the south-facing, and they don't cross that boundary. So there's a lot of different examples of that at this preserve, and just really sets up a really interesting conversation. It also is a place that has been stewarded for a long time, and of course, acknowledging that at least the record that we have here is at least 8,500 years back. Indigenous peoples were in multiple communities stewarding this land and its resources for all the reasons we've heard about from earlier discussion here today. More recently, post-European contact and settlement, years, thanks to the efforts of a number of organizations. There have been a number of, can you guys hear me?
You cut out just briefly, but we're with you.
Okay, it pops up, it says unstable connection, so I'll pause when I see that. I'll try to pause. So we've had, thanks to the efforts of a number of organizations in and around our community, Land Trust of Santa Barbara County, the Botanical Garden, San Ynez Band of Chumash Indians, and others. A lot of lands have been preserved, protected to date, including the islands. We're connected here to a number of different sea and landscapes. The largest national marine protected area lies to our south in California, state marine protected area. We abut the 25,000 acre preserve that is Jack and Lord Endangerment, abuts the almost 100,000 acre Vandenberg Air Force base and significant amount of open space and wildlands there. There's of course a network of private landowners and ranchers that surround us, public lands to the east and north of us. So really an amazing place to think about landscape scale conservation. And the other thing that is just to me really interesting, that we sit at the edge of this, as our lead scientist says, urban to wildland gradient, but we're only really about 150 miles from LAX, and it's an extraordinary population of urban Southern California, which again creates a real value proposition around how we best manage this place to advance learning on so many levels. The preserve itself is chock full of resources. I mentioned nearly 25,000 acres. The land sea protection interface at Point Conception, the State Marine Reserve. We have 78 miles of streams, 300 acres of wetlands, 14 threatened and endangered species, and so on. So really, a microcosm of California in
Uh-oh. Looks like maybe we lost Bill. Brian, might be a little bit of a tall order for you to jump in here. You don't have to obviously pick up on Bill's thread, but maybe it'd be a good opportunity to pivot to share what you were going to be talking about.
Yeah, if you could bump to the next slide, maybe. Oh, here's Bill. Bill, you're on mute.
It wouldn't kick me out. It kicked me out. I shouldn't have said it.
Well, we got you back.
I'm coming back. Okay, hang on. I'm gonna try to get through this. Sorry about that, guys. I'm gonna shut my video, see if that helps. So again, this place is rich in species biodiversity. Some would call it a hotspot for evolution. the extraordinary array of marine and coastal and aquatic and terrestrial plants and animals really sets up a rare opportunity to study species at edge of range, as I've said. And is obviously a region that's going to experience more extreme climate changes. We're already feeling the effects of the drought out here after the last couple of years. But we need a place that we can learn from, and in some cases put back together. And we need to do that in full partnership with our community, including the Chumash community. And so let me just, okay, there's a little transition there. So when we first acquired the preserve in 2017, the end of 2017, over the 2018-2019 period, our lead scientist and a number of staff developed a kind of a first, if you will, operating manual for how we wanted to move forward out here in a very thoughtful way. How do we protect and restore in balance with providing opportunities for learning and connection, reconnection to this place? And there is a document available at our website that's posted right here called the Integrated Resources Management Plan. And really, it's a very high level plan that covers a lot of ground, a lot of territory in terms of the different management plans that we recognize we need to take place, as well as sort of the interim custodial stewardship that needs to happen to make sure that we're preserving and taking care of this place. And from that, we developed a strategic plan. The strategic plan has a vision for really bringing together this idea of a dynamic coastal landscape that is protected and restored, and a place where we can understand a living laboratory. We can understand both the exceptional natural, but also the cultural legacy here, and bring those two things together in service of our conservation efforts. Jack and Laura Endangerment, who founders of REPI, and really key to our advancing conservation day with the use of their Esri GSI technology platform, see this place as a place we can also use new technology to support and accelerate learning and share stories, disseminate learning from this place. And finally, a fourth kind of leg of the chair, if you will, here is how do we use this place to engage leadership for the future of conservation from all communities. And so this place has been already kind of a magnet for science and discovery work. Here are some pictures of a number of different activities that have been going on out here, including work doing a comprehensive survey of the coastal area with respect to what is out here from in terms of a record of human settlement predating European contact. Troy Rick, our lead partner in the left here, is one of our lead archaeologists on that lane. Graham from Esri is in the upper right, and is using new technology to develop story maps for how we can thoughtfully share what we're learning about cultural and natural resources out here, so that we're not promoting inappropriate access and folks that might want to take advantage of that for their own personal gain, but making sure that all that we're learning about both terrestrial, cultural, marine resources is available for many communities to learn from. So, and we have now at least, this is an old slide, but I would say we have even more partners today, but we have over 60 research projects, including archaeology work under the guidance of Brian and Tori and the St. Inez Band of Chumash elders that is looking at all sorts of the resources that we have out here, really trying to, at this point in the early part of the development of the preserve, understanding what we have so that we can be guided in making the best decisions going forward. What's cool about this preserve, there's just a few things to point out here. We have, for example, the preserve contains almost the entirety of the Halama watershed. The Halama watershed, which is the size roughly of Manhattan, is a watershed that provides us an opportunity to document and assess everything from groundwater to precipitation, and do that as we advance our goals for steelhead recovery, for example. We have this really amazing coastal area, this north-south interface I mentioned, and all these coastal lands, which is really rare in Southern California to work on restoring coastal sand dynamics, for example, and coastal terrace prairie. Oak woodlands this is one of the greatest Southern California refuge for coast live oak on the coast of California, and we're working to restore that. And of course, I mentioned the record of human communities here as a really important part of the opportunity to learn here. Yes, there has been impact here. What this photo doesn't show is some of the larger impacts. We've got a railroad that runs through the property that not only impacts a number of coastal streams and watersheds, but certainly did permanent damage to cultural communities that were here in terms of particularly along the coastline. We have, there was oil and gas development out here. Of course, there's 100 and some years of ranching. We are working in partnership with the Coastal Commission to repair and restore a number of places on the preserve, including removal of 300 acres of ice plant, which will hopefully lead to 1,000 acres of ice plant removal. We just finished a project to plant over 6,000 oak trees in parts of the preserve. Laura Riga, who's in the audience today, has been leading those efforts. We are actively grazing the ranch. We've reduced our herd size down to 300 from perhaps 600 mother cows. It's a cow-calf operation. We are managing the herd under a rangeland management plan that we had developed and adopted 2 years ago as part of one of our sub-plans under the Integrated Resources Management Plan. Cattle are a really important tool for us to manage weeds, manage fuel, and use as a restoration tool a number of our restoration projects. We continue to look for ways to increase the dynamism of our grazing program out here, and are now beginning to develop a process to create a plan for fire management, including the application of not just fire to reduce fuel for safety, but also looking at natural resource conservation goals as well as cultural goals with our fire program. I'll back up and say that we have some really good partnerships already emerging with Wildlife Conservation Board and NRCS, including funding and support for things like fencing and water infrastructure that's going to help support the grazing rotation and rotational restoration work we want to accomplish out here, including the Steelhead Recovery projects. And that here's a slide that speaks to our current efforts to move forward our first really sort of major restoration project at the preserve involving a likely extirpated species, the southern steelhead, which has been seen in the Halama Creek as recently as the 90s. The lower reach has 2 barriers that we are now designing plans to remove. We also have received funding to support new fencing to provide opportunities to move the cattle out of the stream in concert with our developing new water systems for cattle that will help create sort of no cattle zones, or at least more control over our watershed area, the in-stream areas of our watershed where cattle have historically grazed. And of course, as I mentioned, bringing new tools and technology to bear on understanding what's happening in this watershed over time as we do these projects. The preserve is host to a whole number of wide-ranging animals and species. Here, of course, some of the most charismatic. These are high-def photos that have been captured by one of our citizen volunteers whose side occupation is helping us manage a number of cameras on preserve to document what animals are coming and going from the preserve and how they're using the preserve, including a lot of access to our beaches. And so we're seeing a lot of interface between our large carnivores like mountain lions and coyotes with food sources at the beach, including marine mammals and shorebirds and the like, which is pretty interesting. All of this work is an opportunity to look for ways to partner and bring the community to bear in developing a really kind of citizen stewardship practice and a way to really I believe, work with, in close partnership, the Chumash community and thinking about ways we can reintroduce cultural stewardship to the land. And the Nature Conservancy is, itself broadly, in addition to, myself personally and our project, leaning into this challenge of how we can be better partners with Indigenous communities across North America. And we've heard some examples of ways that can happen today. And, I have to obviously acknowledge that, again, of course, we're the center of Chumash culture. We need to move at the speed of trust. How we invest in increasing the capacity of our Chumash partners, to me, is something we need to do a much better job of, including bringing funding and support and opportunities and for learning and connection. And that's something that we're really thinking hard about at the preserve. And so I'm going to turn it over here to Brian Hogan, who was introduced by Matthew at the top. Brian is a member of the St. Inez Band, with whom we have an MOU. The St. Inez Band elders and the Nature Conservancy entered into an MOU as a first step towards building a relationship with the Chumash community broadly. We're not by any stretch of the matter limiting our view to the St. Inez Band. The St. Inez Band already had an established presence, if you will, here through a partnership with Vandenberg, an MOU with Vandenberg, and also our neighbors to the east at Hollister Ranch. And they have a lot of shared interest here that we're working with to understand more about with them, in hopes that will lead us to ways that we can partner with the Chumash community and in the ways we've heard in this workshop in the future. So Brian, can I turn it over to you, and I'll click to the next slide and you say
Yeah, thank you, Bill. So hello, everyone, and thank you, Matthew, for the introduction. In the interest of the next presentation, I'll try to speed this up a little bit, but the map that you're currently looking at is a synthesis of all of the villages that are known to my people, as well as those that were documented by the various Spanish expeditions to the region, as well as the missionization period. Essentially, so unlike the other maps that showed the location of the Endangerment Preserve, the reason it was left off of this map is to really show the breadth and the distance that the Chumash population itself spread out over the landscape. But if you look at Point Conception in the bottom left portion of the mainland, you'll see two villages that are called Shishalap and Shilamakshtush, and those serve as the southeast and northwest boundary of the Endangerment Preserve along the coastline. So we as the Chumash people are quite diverse, although most people refer to us as the Chumash. The reason being is that it's a reference to the Chumashan language family, and the different tribal groups are organized around the languages that they spoke or speak currently. And so that's why we are called the Shamala Chumash. And then there are the Barbarino, Venturino, and so on and so forth. And each one is associated with the different missions. So when we think about Point Conception, culturally, this place, it's almost impossible to really describe how important it is to our culture. The Cliff Notes version of that is it is a linguistic, a cultural, technological, and geographic boundary in Chumash society. And most importantly, Point Conception itself is the place that our souls would depart to the afterlife. When someone in Chumash society dies, their soul travels to Point Conception and bathes in the pools at the base of the point before departing to Shimilaksha. And so this importance has maintained our tribe within our tribe since time immemorial, and we are incredibly excited about working with the Nature Conservancy to restore our presence on the preserve. It's been a long time since we have had access to this area. And so, like Bill was saying, in March 2020, the Nature Conservancy and the St. Inez Band of Chumash Indians engaged in an MOU with the overall goal to really identify and develop good stewardship practices for the preserve. And since that time, myself, my role within the Nature Conservancy, organized on-site meetings with the Elders Council to co-see the preserve, to share our experience and our vision while we are actively engaging in the preserve itself. And we also have established a regular presence within the Elders Council meetings so that we can have open discussions about the current and future activities that are going on within the preserve. So with that said, I'd like to explain a little bit about why I'm excited about this personally. So as a tribe, we are certainly familiar with the Nature Conservancy. They own the western part of Santa Cruz Island, or we call it Limu. And when they acquired it in 1978, a lot of the effort went into really maintaining or eradicating some of the invasive plant species and animal species, and what is commonplace within our region and much of other indigenous landscapes. Or most of the time when people consult with us, it's really for cultural resources. And that was no different on Santa Cruz Island. And myself being an archaeologist, I've certainly spent a lot of time with the Nature Conservancy. And so I was excited that this property was purchased and would be managed by the Nature Conservancy because of the opportunity it presented to start from scratch, to build a positive relationship built on trust and transparency. And so why I'm excited is that the majority of our people have never seen the entirety of their homeland. They probably haven't seen 10% of it. And so the ability to bring people out here to experience the area that they used to call home is incredibly exciting. A lot of the families that belong to my tribe are the great grandchildren of those who lived at Shishalop. And so this is walking in their ancestors' shoes in a literal sense. So it's extremely exciting. And one thing that I would like to talk about in the theme of some of the other presenters is the importance that this opportunity presents for knowledge recovery and knowledge acquisition. To give you an idea of how significantly impacted our population was from the mission system, is the example I'll provide now with, it's an example of how such a small and seemingly unimportant tidbit of knowledge results in a disastrous consequence. And this example is, for those of you who are familiar with the Islay cherry has a very thin pulp on the outside of a really rather disappointingly large pit. And we, as a people, used to eat a lot of that. We would process it much like we did acorns and leach it. And the reason we leached it is because the pit itself contains cyanide. And you look at the mission records, and within one generation of being inducted into the mission system, the people forgot how to properly process it in some cases. And you look at the death record, and entire families had succumbed to respiratory failure because of the cyanide within the pit and because of the knowledge that was taken from them during the mission system. And so this place represents a great opportunity for us to really experience this place like we haven't yet to in our lifetimes, and to really relearn a lot of this information. And so the overall goal that we are pushing for here at the Jack and Laura Endangerment Preserve is really to restore the Chumash presence and stewardship on the preserve, and to develop and explore potential projects that meet that goal or entertain that goal. I'll go through these rather quickly, but one of them is the Cultural Keystone Place project. The Cultural Keystone Place is really borrowed from biology and really is defined here as an important and central place to the Chumash worldview and to our identity. It's central within our region geographically and culturally, religiously, and spiritually. It's essentially looks at the last roughly 9,000 years of human and environmental interaction on the preserve through the lens of archaeology, and takes tribal involvement to a much deeper level than just asking them to review proposals, but to help train them as cultural monitors into the direction of cultural resource management, and really tries to build capacity within the tribe itself. Another idea that is in the early stages of development, and we're considering how we move forward with this, is to develop cultural fellows or Chumash fellows. And what I mean by that is we're all aware of moving at the speed of trust, and the way tribal organizations move isn't necessarily to the same pace that non-tribal organizations move. And to kind of combat that and to create a greater Chumash presence, the development of fellows, the fellows themselves would be tasked with integrating themselves, the Chumash perspective, their presence within different aspects of the preserve, a lot of, to break it up into rough categories, environmental, education, and cultural. So we're in the process of developing what that might look like in the future. We're also looking at incorporating stewardship practices of the Chumash and developing landscape management and restoration efforts. Some of examples of these would be gathering of traditional materials for basket weaving, for different feasts, for tool production. One I find remarkably interesting aspect of the Endangerment Preserve is it actually sits or borders some of the largest quarries in the Chumash region that were locations that we used to mine stone to make these prolific chert blades that are some of my favorite aspects of our culture. Other aspects that we're trying to develop are really, something that we think about often is how do we get people out here? How do we get tribal interest on the preserve? And one of the ways that we're trying to develop this is educational field trips or workshops, things that bring in the Chumash population, not just for cultural, but just for a fun day with their family, something that we as a people could have done with ease 400 years ago. And so we're really trying to figure out ways to restore the Chumash population to the preserve. And it's a very exciting time for us as a tribe and us as the Nature Conservancy. I will stop it there.
Thanks, Brian.
Brian, Bill, that was just so inspiring. Thank you for sharing. And I know that it's a work in progress. But I know that was a large reason why I wanted you two to share, because I think it it's one of the really special efforts that's going on in the state. So thank you for being transparent and forthcoming and for taking the time to be with us. I'm going to pivot to our third and final case study. And Alexi and Alec, I know we're running a little bit behind on time, but I just want to emphasize that I think it's far more important that you guys are able to share your story than than it is for us to have the full time for the panel. So please, take the time you need to share, and we'll have time for the panel as much as remains. So while I introduce you both, if you wouldn't mind sort of turning your screens on and getting your presentation put together, that would be great. So Alexi Sagona, who in addition to helping organize this meeting, he's also a PhD student at UC Berkeley in the Department of Environmental Science, Policy and Management. He's also a member of the Amamutsan Tribal Band and is a part-time steward with the Amamutsan Land Trust. And Alec Apodaca is a PhD student in the Department of Anthropology at UC Berkeley, and also a consulting environmental archaeologist for the Amamutsan Land Trust. His research focuses on the historical ecology of Indigenous prescribed burning practices along the coastal region of Central California. And so with that, I'll let you guys take it away.
Thank you, Matthew, for that introduction. Can you hear me okay? And are you seeing my title slide?
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. I'm going to kick us off and focus on the methods and the field work. And I'll hand it over to Alexi about midway to talk about the broader implications of this project. So today I'm going to be talking about the Amamutsan's approach to revitalizing Indigenous stewardship on their traditional homelands. And for the sake of time today, we're just going to focus on some case studies from the Santa Cruz coast. So a core effort into restoring and revitalizing Indigenous stewardship is the Integrative Cultural Resources Survey Program that the Amamutsan Land Trust operates. And just as a reminder, the big reason here is that the Amamutsan believe they have a spiritual obligation from Creator to use fire in Indigenous stewardship to take care of the land and the environment. So, the broad goal of the survey program is to document, to protect, and steward cultural and natural resources. And another broader goal of that is to identify areas that may be suitable to bring back cultural burning, and also use those surveys, that information from the surveys, to feed into other restoration projects, such as collecting seeds from rare plants and other things. So what makes the integrative survey integrative? Well, it combines both biological and non-biological resources, just like Chairman Lopez talked about in the beginning of the talk. The first component is really archaeological sites. It's natural springs, view sheds, it's sources of minerals. It also could be salmon spawning habitat. The other component is biological. And so this is ethnobotanical plants, notable patches of like hazelnut, for example, or, grassland seed foods, and also vegetation types. So this can be a whole grassland itself or an oak woodland. So as an example, we're going to focus on some recent work that happened at the Chitoni Coast Dairies National Monument. So it's about 5,800 acres, and it's this really beautiful sweeping marine terrace geology. There's a extensive coastal prairie, there's redwood forest, there's some oak woodlands, and there's a lot of riparian woodlands with buckeye and bay and other riparian taxa. One thing to keep in mind is that when BLM acquired this property, there was very little systematic surveys that occurred on the land. So BLM approached the Yamamutsun Land Trust to work together to identify areas to provide management plans for cultural and natural resources. So how do you survey 5,800 acres? Well, first of all, you don't really survey 5,800 acres. You look at a smaller universe of that. And so we stratify the landscape and we focus on, broad areas with gently sloping terrain, flat land that is within 100 meters of a perennial water source. And we have found that by stratifying the land and looking at those particular areas, it increases your probability of encountering cultural resources. So the image on the left is David, who's a younger steward. He's doing a catch and release survey grid, which basically means you set up this systematic grid across the land, and you remove the vegetation, and you collect a certain amount of mineral soil just from the surface. And what we do is we screen it for artifacts, ecofacts, and we count and weigh and identify everything in the field. Then after we quantify that, we put it right back in where we found it. So this is a sustainable and a low impact way to really study the archaeology of a landscape. And on the right, you have David's brother, Lenny, who's doing some recording of vegetation. And this can occur as a single point, or it can also just be a very large polygon. And so what's interesting is that these two data sources can be collected simultaneously in the field. So this is an example of the archaeology. The catch and release really is to, quantify surface densities of artifacts and ecofacts. It tells us the boundaries of archaeological sites and other basic information about the site. We can go off and give this information to BLM for their planning purposes about, areas to avoid where they're going to put trails and parking lots and such. So this is a concept map of the results of the catch and release survey. So this is about 40 catch and release survey units that we did. And as you can see, the red dots indicate a surface unit that didn't have any archaeological materials. And then the small green circles means that it's low density. And then the bigger the circle means the higher density of archaeological materials. So this is about 40 catch and release units covering an area of about 60 meters. So this is just one site, but this is important because it tells us the boundary of the sites. And then, like I mentioned, we can go off and give this to the land managers so they can use that for their planning purpose. Let's take a look at what this catch and release looks like on a landscape scale. So this is about 400 or 500 catch and release units, covering about 1,000 meters. So this is a canyon. And, when it's all said and done, it doesn't take much of an imagination to see that when Native people were using it, living in this area, that it would have been much more open canopy, and you're able to move up and down the corridor. image on the right is an example of what it looked like. To get into all these survey units, we had to go in there with loppers, machetes, and we had to spend a few days just, creating access to get to our survey locations. And so, just something like that, it really tells us the distribution of archaeological sites throughout a landscape. And like I said, it doesn't take much of imagination to see that when under Indigenous stewardship, the land was much more open. So this is an example of the archaeological mapping, but it's still really incomplete without the vegetation to really paint a picture of cultural landscapes. And just to keep in mind, this is, this survey program is a fundamental step to identify cultural landscapes. So this is an example of the vegetation maps that we do. And what really tells us that we're in a culturally significant area, a culturally significant landscape is not only a high density of archaeological sites, but it's also a high density of ethnobotanical plants and vegetation that are in proximity to the archaeological sites. And what that tells us is that these areas require special management plans. The example that I'm showing here, there is an abundance of seed and nut foods, basketry taxa, and we even encountered some intact perennial native grassland. And I don't know if you can see my cursor, but it's this hashtag green that's indicating native grassland. And if anyone is familiar with, some of the basic ecology of the Santa Cruz coast, is that these native grasslands are very, very rare, and they're disappearing at an alarming rate. So it's, fundamental work like these integrative surveys, it allows us to go off and locate where these perennial grasslands are at. And you can see in the blue is northern coastal scrub. So that's like coyote brush, blackberry. So things that have relatively less economic value. So this information tells, the tribe can go in here and look at this area as a place to start doing a cultural burn to really expand that native grassland and push back some of the shrublands. Take a look at some plants up close. For the sake of time, I'll just talk about the hazelnuts, which are on the right. And this is a pretty significant stand that we encountered, maybe a dozen to 20 hazelnut shrubs. And this is an area that we want to return to and do some basic calculations, such as, number of usable stems for basketry on the shrub, or just number of acorn servings per shrub. So instead of, we can also combine it with more traditional forestry measurements like, canopy cover, density, but it's also important to have these measurements or these quantifiers that are usable and useful for the tribe. So after we do the integrative cultural resource survey and we find these areas that have archaeological sites, the tribe can elect to do some more intensive archaeological research. And so this is what I'm showing here is an example of eco-archaeological work, an investigation using low impact strategies, which is, we'll go out and do geophysical surveys such as ground penetrating radar, magnetometer, some augering. So it's very small scale in terms of its disturbance, but it really tells us a lot of information. And the goal is to find these really rich deposits that have charred botanicals such as seeds and nutshells. And so after we do this more of an intensive investigation, we're able to get information about the plants and the animals, and then the tribe goes ahead and uses this information for their stewardship plans. We also learn a lot about cultural burning practices in this area and also foodways. So the next step after we do the integrative surveys and we locate these culturally significant landscapes, and then even after we do eco-archaeological investigation to really understand what plants were being used and what sort of the environmental composition was in that area, we can go ahead and collect seeds that we locate or sources of seed that we locate from the integrative resource survey, and then we can grow them in a greenhouse. And the goal of this project is to really, propagate and bulk up seeds of culturally important grassland plants to be directly used in ecological restoration. And the current goal, I believe, is to outplant 90,000 of these grassland taxa, and then another 30,000 near the greenhouse. So this is an example. We got red maize on the left. We have some brodeas, Indian potatoes on the right. These are both plants that we find in the archaeobotanical record when we do our eco-archaeological work, but they're also prevalent in the ethnographic and ethnohistorical record as well. This is an example of what it looks like after these plants are propagated in the greenhouse. We put them in field beds. So we outplant them in field beds so they're accessible for the tribe members to steward the plants and also collect them for seed. And so this is a cycle that occurs until we have the amount of seed and the amount of plants necessary to do a meaningful restoration project. So this is an example of tarweed, another plant that occurs in the archaeobotanical record as well as the ethnographic record. This one is relatively more common to find on the Santa Cruz coast, and we locate significant patches of them with these baseline integrative surveys. We then go out and collect the seed whenever they're ready, then we can bring them back in the greenhouse. So the image on the left shows us starting the tarweeds and in these seed trays. And then after they get to a certain age, we can plant them out in the beds, which is the image in the middle. And then once the seeds ripen and they're ready to harvest, we can then go off and collect all the seed. So like I mentioned, these seeds will be used directly into restoration, or the tribe can use them for food and other cultural purposes, whatever their specific objectives are at that time. But sometimes plants are very hard to find. One thing that I want to say is for doing plant restoration, it's very easy to pick up the phone and call a nursery that's several counties away, several zip codes away, and ask them for 15 pounds of red maize. It's a whole nother ball game when you want to go and collect those red maize from ancestral sites, locally appropriate sources. Red maize is one of the plants that is very rare on the Santa Cruz coast today, probably because of the exclusion of indigenous fire management. On the image on the left is Rob Cuthrell, who's a core member of the Alamutun Land Trust. We recorded the location of one red maize a few years ago during our integrative surveys. We returned to this location since we took a GPS point of it, and we found that one red maize again, and we collected the seeds. We brought those seeds into the greenhouse, and then from that one red maize plant, we were able to outplant hundreds of red maize. So I think this is just a positive example of how the integrative surveys provide this fundamental baseline to identify the locations, but also the conditions of these ethnobotanical plants. And that's a really, really important goal and effort that the Alamutun Land Trust is focusing in on. For the sake of time, I'm going to leave it there, and I'm going to hand it over to Alexi to elaborate on some of the broader impacts of this work.
Thank you so much, Alec, for sharing that. Can folks hear me okay? Perfect. Well, Alec really gave a great overview about the ecological and material components of Indigenous stewardship. And so what I'll be doing is just focusing a little bit more on the social relations of Indigenous stewardship in the context of co-management, really to get at the topic of this panel today. As Hillary Rennick spoke about earlier, access is a very large issue for tribes. And so, partnerships can support that. Could we go to the next slide, please? So I'm going to be situating this in kind of the context of California natives. Unfortunately, the policies I think are a bit different in other places. But I wanted to show you, this slide on recent California Native American policy, and apologies for these formatting errors. But in the past couple of years, there's been a growing move by the California state government to acknowledge the importance of Indigenous stewardship and promoting co-management through the Statement of Administrative Policy, recognizing the importance Indigenous peoples have for biodiversity, and also, there's Senate bills that support tribal nations holding a conservation easement, cultural easements, and also Assembly Bill 52 from 2014 really pushed tribal consultation when you're, doing environmental impact reviews. And so all these things are really useful for not only federally recognized tribes in California, but also non-federally recognized tribes as well. And so, I think we're in a space today where these conversations are supported by these policies. And often, these collaborations are voluntary in nature, but they do have a little bit of backing, from these sort of formal policy agreements. Could we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So, one thing that can happen is MOUs. And so I think Bill mentioned earlier an MOU between TNC and the Santinez Chumash elders. And these are really important. These, can be bilateral agreements that are, kind of like formalized handshake agreements. They're non-binding in nature, but they're a good starting, useful step forward. And so for the Amamutsun tribal band and Amamutsun Land Trust, there's been about 5 or 6 MOUs that have been signed. And those are really helpful for access and really establishing, the relationship, building that trust, et cetera. Could we go to the next slide, please? And there's also, cultural conservation easements, and these are a bit more binding. These are more formal, and they might take a little bit longer time, and the relationship might take a little bit of time before you can establish an easement between 2 parties sometimes. So as Chairman Lopez was talking about trust, you wouldn't expect to do an easement right away, right off the bat for building a relationship. It might take a little bit of time, but the Amamutsun Land Trust holds a conservation easement or cultural easement at Mount Umunum, the place of their creation story in Santa Clara County in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and also are forming one at Nyland Ranch in San Juan Bautista. And so these are really useful for access. Next slide, please. I also wanted to highlight a couple weeks ago, an MOU was signed between state parks and the Amamutsun Land Trust. And this was the first MOU state park signed, with a non-recognized tribe. And it supports kind of the stewardship of Kidoste Valley, which Alec was alluding to, the state park property where we're doing some of this plant propagation. And it also supports grant obligations. Alex showed that greenhouse project. The funding there sort of relied on a formalized agreement between state parks and the Amamutsun Land Trust. And so it has some of those practical purposes as well. Next slide, please. And so, what do you think about when you think about co-management, and what should you be thinking about? Well, there's several things, right? And there's different scales of co-management. There's sort of non-formal and formal things. I'm showing a bit more of the formal side. But one thing to keep in mind is decision-making authority. Who's making the decisions? How are they being made? Is it really collaborative, or is it more hierarchical in the relationship? Is Indigenous traditional knowledge being included here and being applied? Or, is one sort of mindset, maybe Western science, being prioritized over TEK, for example, traditional ecological knowledge? And, are people acknowledging Indigenous sovereignty and self-determination? Tribal nations are tribal governments, and they wish to be treated, in government-to-government relationships in many instances. And also, in thinking about the power relations, oftentimes Native peoples are just volunteering on their own and trying to make time, and are dealing with all these people who are employees and are on, paid time. And so sometimes, there's that imbalance, and it's really useful to have, funding. And so Alex talked about the cultural resource, management. That really shows an example of getting tribal people, Native stewards on the ground, getting them employed, and them being able to, get this knowledge and be able to try to make decisions based on, their findings. Super important stuff. Next slide, please. And also, just talking about formal arrangements, right? Sometimes, these take a lot of time. They move slow, but these formal arrangements can support relationship building and trust. Formalizing an MOU really shows a commitment on both sides. It also facilitates access to land. Sometimes, traditional basket weavers talk about needing to have sustained access to a place. and needing to know that you can continue to go there because it takes so long to tend basketry materials. Unfortunately, some of these MOUs are only about 5 years in duration, but if you have a real strong relationship, then I think people would be comfortable with putting some time and energy and effort into cultivating certain areas and for basketry materials, et cetera, and knowing that you can return in the future. And also supporting Indigenous environmental governance. And what I mean by that is just, tribal people, and Chairman Lopez always says, we have sort of the authority over our cultural resources, that we expect to be able to speak on behalf of how to manage our cultural resources. And that's really important for tribal peoples. Regardless of whether we own the land or don't own the land, the obligation to take care of Mother Earth extends to all ancestral lands, regardless of who owns it. Next slide, please. So, just to wrap up here and put it all in for full circle and wrap up and bring it back to what Alec was talking about, these cultural resources or surveys are really putting tribal peoples back on their land. And, Brian talked about earlier how returning to lands that your ancestors used to go to all the time is so significant. And I really liked that comment. And I think that, these surveys really are useful because it brings people out to ancestral land they haven't been to before. They're also able to be employed. And when thinking about access, it's also important to think about not just the physical access of being on the land, but also, access as being the ability to benefit from things. So sometimes, it's important to feel comfortable out gathering lands. If you're in public spaces, sometimes people ask you questions and stuff like that, or maybe harass you a little bit. So knowing that you're not going to get harassed by anyone is really important. And then access to plant knowledge, where things are, as Alec was mentioning about this map. Also being able to identify the plants, training tribal members on how to identify these things and how to steward them. That's really helpful for access as well, because then they're able to gather it more easily. It's also a great tool for engaging in collaborative decision-making, right? So this is, sort of a report or findings that's developed by the tribe and given to landowners, right? And so then the tribe can make recommendations based on that. So then the decision-making is shared, and the findings are shared, and that's really important. So this is really a mutually beneficial arrangement where you have sort of a service being done to the land, where tribal peoples are out there engaging in these, reciprocal relationships with the land and revitalizing these important relationships. But also, it has sort of stewardship implications, land management implications that's great beyond just the tribal members, because as other people have spoke about, Chairman Lopez and others, biodiversity is really important. And I think that's something that's a common element throughout all this, whether or not you're an Indigenous person, is, the health of the ecosystem is first and foremost. Next slide. And finally, we just wanted to acknowledge the folks that have been really helpful here. I've been able to get out there with Alec and do some of these surveys, and have really learned a lot from Alec and the other folks at the UC Berkeley California Archaeology Lab. And there's been so many other great stewards and partners here that we just wanted to display here. So thank you very much for listening. And I hope that you can take away something from this presentation about the tool of a cultural resource management and the surveys that Indigenous peoples can do. Thank you.
To the two of you, thank you so much. What a perfect capstone presentation to this afternoon. I think you both, in different ways, really excellently summarized, I think, a lot of the issues that we are trying to tackle today in some of these presentations. So thank you for the time and putting that together and sharing that with us. We wonderfully sort of went over time. I think that I've been hearing from folks on the chat just how engaging all of these case studies have been and how rewarding the presentations are. So I don't feel badly at all to cut into our panel time. It's 3:40. We do have 20 minutes remaining to invite the panelists, if you're still there and still willing to turn your videos on, to enter into conversation. I would encourage, because it's a webinar, attendees can't just sort of turn their video and volume on. Instead, the questions sort of need to go through the Q&A. Lynn Hunsinger of UC Berkeley has graciously volunteered to help navigate us through this conversation and this panel time. And so, Lynn, if you're ready, I might turn it over to you. I'm seeing in the chat she's encouraging folks to add questions to the Q&A, which would be great if you could. I know that as we've been going, that there have been a number of questions that have been answered quite thoughtfully by many of our panelists, and there's there's I guess some questions coming into the Q&A. So Lynn, if you're there, I'll let you take it over, and we'll end promptly at 4. But again, there'll be an opportunity to transition into the kind of social hour, and Allison is going to provide a link at the very end for those of you who want to do that. So Lynn, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you, Matthew. I just want to say that I'm intimidated by having responsibility for this last 15 minutes, because you folks have been incredible. I just really learned a lot today. At times I was quite moved and really impressed by the level of knowledge and the efforts that many of you have brought to these panels. So thank you so much. I hope those from the audience will write more questions into the Q&A. Of course, I have some to ask, but as panelists, we can't write in the Q&A, I discovered. So I wanted to begin by asking if any of you had questions for any of the other panelists.
Lynn?
Yes.
Hi, this is Jill from Hawaii.
Yes.
And my question is actually for Alec. I saw the native plant propagation process that you were going through. And in Hawaii, we have, a similar situation and a challenge for both the seed or the material. But we hear of the relentless droughts that stricken California. And I just wondered, how successful can propagation and establishment of native plants be for your efforts? I know sometimes ours are slightly in vain, but we don't give up. So I was just wondering, how difficult is that for you?
Thank you, Jill. That's actually a really important question. One approach that, this coming spring, we're actually going to be putting plants in the ground, and that's a big challenge that's on our plate, is the timing of it with making sure there's enough precipitation. But by maturing the plants in the greenhouse and then doing direct outplanting, we feel that the plants might have a little bit of a better chance to withstand any drought, because out there in the cultural preserve land, there's not going to be any sprinklers feeding them. So we think that a combination of direct planting of more mature herbaceous forbs, as well as experimenting with direct seeding as well. But to be honest, this is all this experimentation, and this is work in progress. But we're hopeful for the future, and we're looking forward to the spring of 2022 when we actually do put some plants in the ground. But exactly what you're talking about in terms of working with the weather and the climate, those are big challenges.
Thank you, Alec. That's great answer.
Does anybody else have a question from our panel for our panel? I have one, and I guess it's particularly addressed to the Native members of the panel. What is our responsibility? I'm a researcher, and I find myself doing research on lands in many places in California. And of course, I recognize that those are native lands ultimately. And especially when I'm working on a public property or a preserve, and I know that there is a tribe in that area whose lands we're working on, what's my responsibility? And I guess this could apply to any of us who are doing range management or vegetation management or land management. what should we do, and what is our responsibility to the tribes whose land we're working on? We are all, I think everybody here is really committed to doing, of course, the best we can as we understand it. But in terms of respecting the fact that we're working on somebody else's land, what would you folks suggest?
I'll take the first stab of that, at that, if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
Well, I believe that you need to let the tribe know and only work on it with their permission. And you should invite them to be part of, let them know clearly what you're doing and why and what's going to become of those results. And invite them to become part of it. And, and then if there's funding for it, ensure that the Indigenous people that are working there are paid for their time. I can tell you that 90% of the meetings that I go to, I'm the only one in that room that's not getting paid. That's very, that happens all the time. So, and they give the tribe decision-making authority on all issues related to culture. Those are very important points.
Thank you. Anyone else want to take a stab at my question? Okay, well, we have several questions in the chat. Since I just talked about research a little bit, I have one of the first questions is particularly to Alexia and Alec. How do you integrate TEK and Indigenous collaboration into your PhD process? Have your research questions or experimental designs changed due to working with Indigenous cultures?
Sure. Thank you. I'll quickly respond and make sure that Alec is able to respond as well. And, of course, while Alec and I collaborate, I think we have different processes and stuff. So I can only speak for myself, but I think, collaboration with my community has been at the center of my work and why I, went into graduate school. And so it's always been at the forefront, and thinking about, making sure that the research is supporting the issues and needs of community members has allowed me to do, an initial interview project where I interviewed some tribal elders and just asking about, the needs and interests, not necessarily thinking about using it for my dissertation or anything like that, more just kind of getting a feel for what people are interested in. Additionally, it's always important, I think, to get approval from tribal councils, if there are any. And so there's a push, some people call it tribal IRBs, related to the institutional review boards. But getting, that formalized approval and feedback, I think, is really great for establishing trust and building relationships, especially coming from UC Berkeley, where there's, a difficult history around, ancestors being kept there and NAGPRA and stuff like that. It's always really important. So, as a social scientist, that's kind of how my research design shifted, but I'll pass it on to Alec to talk a little bit more about his perspective.
And just really briefly, coming from an archaeology background, my advisor, Kent Lightfoot, worked closely with the Kashaya Pomo in the 1990s and the 2000s. And, one of the core things that he learned was that, archaeological sites can be thought of as living entities. And, archaeology has a bad rap for just going in and tearing things up. And, so I think we have an ethical obligation as archaeologists to work collaboratively with Indigenous people, to integrate some of their worldviews, such as looking at an archaeological site as a living thing and bringing forth this low impact archaeology, which is very minimal, and trying to avoid culturally sensitive materials such as burials. And the other thing that I really learned in my process is really broadening the idea of what cultural resources are. And I feel unfortunately we still kind of limit that to archaeological materials, especially those that don't come from an Indigenous background. But that's something that I try to speak to my colleagues and everything, is to broaden the perspective, and just you speak to Native people, and they've been thinking about this all along. For an example is the plants that are at an archaeological site are just as important as the archaeological site itself, as well as the animals.
Thank you, Alec. Thank you very much. Here's an interesting question from the questions and answers that is very pertinent to what we've been talking about, which is the questioner, Christopher Bartow, asks, the use of cultural fellows, MOUs, and co-management opportunities are all ways of partnering with Indigenous peoples to return to their lands, and bringing TEK back onto landscapes that have suffered changes from Anglo-European settlement. Those cases presented here are wonderful, and I certainly agree. Does the panel have any other ideas or resources for facilitating this return, this access in a way that fosters trust with tribes that haven't been mentioned yet?
I can just jump in here, and I'm not steeped here, and I'm speaking a little bit out of my lane, but I know that the Conservancy, there was a photo on our slideshow of the Trex group, which was a traditional burning exchange group up in Northern California involving 3 tribes up there. And I know our lead on that, Mary Huffman, has worked with Margot Robbins. I believe Margot's with Duroc. I may have mistaken, but yeah. And they've been working on a really cool process of adapting and adopting a planning framework that was developed in Australia, I believe, or New Zealand. They call it healthy country planning, but it's a way to, and in this situation, the Nature Conservancy is just really sort of supporting, as to Val's point, kind of providing funding and resources to kind of hold those processes, and those tribes are working together on their own value, developing the values and principles for what they want to see achieved on the landscape. And of course, it's a much broader set of outcomes than perhaps the Nature Conservancy alone would be looking at. And so there seems to be a number of these sorts of planning tools and frameworks that are popping up that provide interesting templates, perhaps, if that's the right word, for us to work together. And we're looking into some of those and trying to figure out how we might resource some of those kind of conversations ourselves. They seem to be well received where they are working.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. Thank you very much. Here's another question for the group, which I hope some of you can address. And Alexi in particular, but I think any of us might be concerned about this, which is funding to support Indigenous communities for land and resource stewardship work. Was mentioned a number of times today, and I think Val was quite compelling, talking about he was the only unpaid person in the room for a lot of these meetings and so on. This is not an unfamiliar problem, unfortunately. So, okay, so now I lost my place in the question, but are there existing funding channels out there that are easier to access than others? Are there some that you've made use of that others could make use of to do more collaborative work or to help restore access to areas?
Yeah, I'll start with that one, and folks, if there's anything I don't include, please add on. Of course, yeah, that's a wonderful question, and I think what's been really great is in the past few years, there's been definitely a shift of people wanting to include other voices, in decision making and in research, and there's great foundational work that shows the importance of collaborative work, just like Kent Lightfoot's lab that Alec was talking about, doing really great collaborative archaeology and showing the benefits of that. One point I wanted to make, and this is a really difficult, complex thing, depending on if it's on private property, public or federal, state land, all these things. But I've heard from land managers before that when they're, doing a natural resource management project and they're talking about including the use of cultural resources or, cultural resource management in natural resource situations, that it, helped for competitive grants, internal competitive grants. So I think that can be useful, right? Is if you're looking at managing natural resources, but you have another really important element that's related to the tribe and also about managing cultural resources, you may have an advantage for funding. But I'll let other folks add on to that if they want to.
This is the reason that we developed the Amamutsa Land Trust in 2012, and applied for 501c3 status for fundraising and stuff and such. And so that's what has given us a lot of the financial means to do the work that we do. And we've been fortunate in the sense that people are, that we do find funding, and the more people learn about the importance of Indigenous knowledge, they're, the more they're willing to fund you. And we find that really true, with just restoring native plants and its impact on climate change. Since those devastating fires that we had in the Santa Cruz Mountains of the year before last, now people are willing to fund you for fire. We do a lot of work along the coast, and because of climate change, we find funding for those sources, for ocean research and ocean monitoring and ocean restoration. So we are, we've kind of been, lucky in one side, but it's, we're just thankful to our ancestors, for taking care of Mother Earth and showing it, and people now realizing how important and valuable that is and how necessary that is. And that's what's allowing us to get most of our funding today.
Thank you, Val. I'm having a hard time keeping track of whether I'm muted or not. Thank you very much. Bill, you wanted to say a couple words about.
Yeah, there was a question about cattle grade.
Yeah.
At the ranch.
And Bill, can I complicate that a little with Allison's question, which is if any of the other panelists would comment. We just don't have time, but maybe would comment on the use of livestock if they think it's useful as a conservation tool. Okay, please.
Yeah, just my 30-second answer, because we're almost out of time. I realize is, the cattle right now, we're very conscious of the fact that we need it as a tool right now in the absence of other natural processes. We definitely are looking at a lighter touch on the landscape and a little more dynamic rotation with that. There was a question about pigs. We do have a feral pig issue, and we are working on a pig management or predation plan. I mean, fencing off 25,000 acres to keep pigs out is probably not realistic. So we've got to get creative on that. And we actually, the elders have expressed interest in partnering on that activity with us. I don't know how that squares with sort of traditional, since the pigs were introduced, I think, how that squares, but it is an opportunity to do joint stewardship, and we're looking at that. Brian?
Yeah, as far as traditional goes, it's more of the process of being on the landscape in our traditional capacity of hunting and managing species. It just so happens the first species that we're going to attack is the feral pig population.
All right, thanks. Thank you. I'm sorry we don't have time for more questions because this has been great, but I'm glad we had time for every panel and all of our fantastic speakers. So Matthew, would you like to close the meeting? I'm so
Thank
sorry
you.
to do that.
Me too. I'd like to begin the closing just by thanking you, Lynn, for navigating us through the panel. I said I didn't mind cutting into it, but of course I wish we had 3 times as much time. We've lost some of the panelists already, but to those who remain, it's been a really inspiring and meaningful presentation. So thank you for taking the time, many hours out of your day, not to mention preparation and the thought you put into it. And I see that we still have some attendees. I also see that Allison in the chat recently reposted the link to the Zoom meeting that will follow this. So this is a webinar, so we're going to close this down. And for those who are CalPAC members, this is California Pacific section of the Society for Range Management, or even if you aren't and you'd like to meet some or just sort of debrief after this discussion, it would be great to see whoever can join us on that Zoom meeting. We'll be able to see each other's faces, say hello as we normally would if this meeting were in person. I hope that this discussion doesn't end here. I know that I sort of feel inspired to sort of reach out in a couple of different ways, and I hope other people too. And this has been recorded, so we will be sharing this on the CalPAC website. And for those who want specific information or contact, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. And unless there's anybody else on the panel who'd like to reach out, I see a lot of messages happening in the chat. We'll come to a close and hopefully see many of you in the other Zoom meeting that Allison listed just moments ago. Thank you all.